The Long Road to Friendship by the Albinocorn. Chapter 1. Penance. Sunset Shimmer fell. She didn't know how long she had been falling, nor did she care. She was too lost in her own thoughts to pay much attention to it. Had she taken things too far? Kidnapping a dog, brainwashing the students of Canterlot High, attempted murder? Part of her wanted to say yes. She had gone too far with that last one. She wasn't a murderer. She had also said that she wasn't a monster, but the demon that she had been just moments before proved otherwise. Did she feel any regret for her actions? Why should she? The crown should have been hers in the first place. She should have ruled Equestria. She should have been a princess, not perfect Twilight Sparkle. Besides, she, Sunset Shimmer, had lost, hadn't she? Why should she feel any regret? The only thing she regretted was losing. Sunset wanted to scream. It just wasn't fair. It wasn't fair. She had taken the element of magic and wielded its tremendous power. Yes, she had turned into a demon. A part of her that still unnerved her when she thought about it, and the pain she had endured during her transformation. But she had gained ultimate power. She had still managed to lose, beaten by Twilight Sparkle and her miserable friends and shot down by the elements of harmony. Now, she was falling through White's limbo. It was bright and surprisingly warm, and all around her she could hear almost a heavenly hum, like the most talented singer in existence was warming up their voice. Hearing it strengthened the small piece of regret sitting deep in her heart. Had she been wrong? Was there really some worth behind friendship? Some unknown majesty she couldn't see? Nonsense. Who needed friends when you could have power? Sunset had finally hit something solid, but could see nothing beyond the radiant light. It was as if the light itself had solidified and become an invisible floor beneath her. "Hello?" Sunset called. It echoed around her, and Sunset clenched her fists at how feeble it sounded. It faded away, and Sunset was left alone with the ominous humming. She had no idea where she was, but she was getting a horrible feeling that she could very well be dead. Can the elements do that? Can they kill someone? She thought. As the humming grew louder, memories of cruel words spoken and actions taken began to drift through Sunset's mind, making her heart heavy with unwanted regret. Amidst the hum, she thought she could hear a faint beating noise like a drum. Realizing the drum beat was getting closer, Sunset spun around and nearly screamed at what she saw. In front of her was a black and feeble heart. Not the kind that beat in her chest and kept her alive, but the one so used to symbolize love. It pulsed at such a slow rate, Sunset thought it might stop at any moment. Red cracks ran along its surface, looking like rivers of magma across an ash-covered field. It was one of the ugliest things Sunset had ever seen. "It is yours," a voice, or several voices said. They surrounded Sunset from every angle and sounded like a heavenly choir. She now knew the source of the humming. "What do you mean it's mine?" Sunset asked, warily. "Sunset Shimmer, we have seen your heart and this is it. You've rejected friendship for so long and instead held on to hate. You have been cruel, arrogant, selfish, and power-hungry. This is what your heart has turned into." Sunset took a step back from the blackened heart. So? She cleared her throat, trying to hang on to her false vibrato. But standing in front of her heart, even that was fading. "I don't need friendship. I've gotten by on my own." "Sunset Shimmer, your rejection of friendship and drive for power has nearly destroyed the balance of two worlds. Do you honestly feel nothing?" Sunset crossed her arms and turned her nose up, ignoring the tears forming at the corners of her eyes. "Why should I? I lost, didn't I? What does it matter what I feel?" She uncrossed her arms and pointed into the air. "And who are you to judge me, anyway?" "In essence, We are the spirits of the elements of harmony. We have every right to judge you, Sunset Shimmer. You who abused the element of magic and threatened a co-op of Equestria. Sunset swallowed a lump in her throat. That was where she was. Some limbo where the elements could put her on trial. She dug her nails into her palm to stop herself from shaking. All right. So maybe I stepped out of line a bit. What are you going to do with me? Your heart is one of the blackest we've ever seen, and you show little remorse for your actions. Even more so, you continue to reject friendship. Well, what do I need friends for anyway? Sunset shouted. They've never done anything for me. They don't serve any purpose. The only thing they're good for is when I need something from them. There was a drawn-out moment of silence before the voices spoke again. Very well, Sunset Shimmer. If that is how you feel, then our punishment stands as thus. Sunset yelped and grabbed the sides of her head as every memory of her acts of cruelty came flooding in at once. Every time she had used someone, every time she had abused someone, all of her cruel deeds and betrayals came rushing in at once, bringing her to her knees. An image of the demon she had become flashed between each memory, burning itself into the back of her eyelids. She fell onto the unseen floor and began to sob. The pain she had caused so many crushing her black heart into dust. And between the noise of the memories and her sobbing, Sunset could barely hear the spirit speaking. You shall live with our penance until the last shard of hatred leaves your heart, and you learn to truly accept friendship with no thought of self-gain. Until you can learn to love others above yourself, you shall be at their whim and mercy, aiding them whenever they ask for it, and telling them only the truth. The words sounded distant in Sunset's ears, fading away, just like the light that had previously surrounded her. She found herself no longer in the realms of the elements. Instead, she was laying face first in the dirt, her clothes tattered and her body covered in scratches and bruises. Raising her head, she saw that she had ended up in a large crater. Twilight Sparkle stood over her on the edge, looking more disappointed than angry. You shall never rule in Equestria. Any power you may have had in this world is gone. Tonight, you've shown everyone who you really are. You've shown them what is in your heart. Sunset began to crumble out of the hole, her stomach rebelling at the sudden movement. Perhaps it was another effect of being hit with the elements of harmony. She had collapsed at Twilight's feet, vision blurred by tears. She had never felt so horrible in her entire life. Being forced to relive her past actions had left Sunset with one feeling that she thought she would never experience: remorse. I'm sorry, she cried. I'm so sorry. I didn't know there was another way. The magic of friendship doesn't just exist in Equestria. It's everywhere. You can seek it out. Twilight sighed and turned away. Or you can forever be alone. The choice is yours. But all I've ever done since being here is drive everyone apart. I don't know the first thing about friendship. Twilight knelt down and took Sunset's hand, helping her out of the hole and to her feet. She pointed at the 5 girls standing off to the side. I bet they can teach you. Applejack, Rarity, Pinkie Pie, Fluttershy, and Rainbow Dash all gave her various degrees of smiles, with Pinkie's being the largest. Really? They'd want to be my friends? After everything I've done? She didn't get a chance to ask Twilight. Everyone had moved along to watch Principal Celestia return the element of magic to Twilight before they all went back to the gym to finish their dance, leaving Sunset alone. Even Snips and Snail seemed to have vanished. Skirting around the crater, Sunset made her way to the demolished entrance of the school building. Part of her was amazed that she had been able to do that. She hadn't cast magic like that since she had been a pony. She leaned against the crumbling stones and sighed. What was she supposed to do now? She looked up at the statue that secretly housed the portal to Equestria. She could run away, escape back home and live out her life in exile there. No. If she went back, she would chance facing Celestia's wrath. Sunset had completely disobeyed her by jumping through the mirror, not to mention stealing Twilight's crown. There was nothing left for her there. But there wasn't much left here either. Behind her, she could hear the steady beats of the music vinyl scratch blasted out of her stereo system. She could hear the students laughing and talking and enjoying their fall formal. I almost robbed them of that, just to further my own plans. Sunset groaned and pressed her head against the concrete. Now she knew why she had never felt regret before. It was the worst feeling in the world. From one of the hallways came the footsteps and sound of squeaking wheels. Sunset turned and saw Vice Principal Luna escorting Snips and Snails. They pushed a wheelbarrow filled with bricks, mortar, and push brooms in front of them. Luna stopped and handed Sunset a spade. "Well, Miss Shimmer, it looks like you have a long night ahead of you." Sunset gaped at her. "You can't seriously expect me to fix all of this." Luna just waved the spade in front of her. Sunset snatched it and growled. Her feelings of regret were slowly eroding away by feelings of annoyance and anger. She watched Luna walk back towards the gymnasium while Snips and Snails began to sweep the steps, clean of rubble. Trading the spade for the third push broom, Sunset began to sweep as well, deciding to do the easy work first. She had only been working for a few minutes when the sound of giggling reached her. Twilight Sparkle and her 5 friends filed out of the gym and headed for the statue. They stopped at the base to trade hugs and exchange one last goodbye. "This is my chance." Sunset looked up to the pale moon. I could run in after her, or... When she looked back, Twilight and her dog Spike had already slipped through the granite surface of the statue, making their transition back to Equestria. Pinkie ran to try to catch up, but she was met with a solid surface instead. The portal was closed.
"Oh, bummer,"
Pinkie pouted. Sunset shared in some of Pinkie's disappointment. Part of her had wanted to go home. Now she was stuck here for at least another 30 moons.
"Well, I must say, that was certainly an experience,"
Sunset heard Rarity say. "Yeah, I reckon something like that was once in a lifetime," Applejack said.
"Do you think we'll ever see her again?"
Fluttershy asked. Applejack put a hand on Fluttershy's shoulder. "Don't worry, Sugar Cube. I'm sure someday she'll come back to visit."
"If not, we could always go looking for the Twilight Sparkle from this world,"
Pinkie said, bouncing on her toes. Rarity ran a hand through her purple royal curls.
"Well, maybe that's not such a good idea. We can't go looking for her and expect her to be exactly the same. That would be like we're trying to replace her."
Pinkie stood still and said in a downcast voice,
"Oh, yeah, I guess you're right. That would be kinda mean."
"But hey, if we run into Twilight Sparkle, we can still try to be her friend," Applejack reassured. "We should just let her come to us, though. If it's meant to be, it'll happen on its own." There was a long pause before Rainbow Dash said,
"So, what should we do about Sunset Shimmer?"
"Well," Applejack said slowly, "we did promise to try and help her, and I don't go back on my promises." Rarity nodded.
"Neither do I, but I can't just pretend none of the things she did to us ever happened. I need time to settle my feelings, especially after tonight." "Rarity is right. I want to try and be your friend, but she still scares me,"
Fluttershy mumbled. "Well, I guess it's a good thing school's canceled next week, seeing as they've got some construction to do. Gives us all a little time to settle down," Applejack said.
Yeah!
Rainbow Dash cheered.
No school for a week. Who's down to hang?" Ooh, me!
Pinkie Pie frantically waved her hand in front of Rainbow's face.
"We can hang out just like we used to. Oh, it'll be so much fun."
Sunset watched them walk away, their voices growing fainter as they disappeared into the dark. She leaned against her broom, mulling over her thoughts. Were they really going to try and make friends with her? Sunset wasn't sure if they were admirable or just stupid. She gripped her broom tighter as her feelings of regret finally died away. Her old feelings of contempt and superiority returned. Who said she wanted to be friends with them anyway? It was their fault she was in this situation. If they hadn't interfered, she'd be in Equestria right now. And besides, they didn't actually want to be her friend. They were just doing a favor for Twilight Sparkle. Twilight Sparkle. Sunset squeezed the broom so hard her knuckles turned white. In the end, it all came down to her, little Miss Perfect Princess, taking the crown that should have been Sunset's in the first place, and leaving her behind in this world to rot. Sunset hated her. With every fiber of her being, Sunset hated her.
Hey, Sunset!
Snip's voice dragged Sunset out of her thoughts.
Could you stop standing there and help us? This is gonna take all night.
Sunset was about to deliver a sharp retort when she felt a jolt like lightning run down her spine. Almost as if acting on their own, her arms began to move the broom, resuming her sweep up of the rubble. That was weird. Sunset shrugged it off and continued working. Snips was right. This would take all night. Long Road to Friendship by the Albinocorn. Chapter 2. Chance Meeting. Sunset Shimmer was grateful Vice Principal Luna had been half-joking about the reconstruction of the school's front wall and the large crater in the ground, while she, Snips, and Snails were forced to work until well after the dance was over. Luna and Celestia had claimed that professional manpower would be needed to fix everything, and the three had been allowed to go. Of course, Sunset now had to spend next week helping the construction workers repair the wall. Her punishment also included a month of detention and academic probation. That last one didn't worry Sunset at all, as she only received A's in all of her classes. Snips and Snails, on the other hand, well, she hoped they knew a good tutor. Sunset now trudged her way back to her home. Celestia had offered her a ride, but Sunset had refused, wanting to brood over her failure, and because she couldn't let Celestia know where she really lived. The night air was cool, the autumn wind caressing Sunset's face as she moved against it. The drafts would occasionally pick up and make Sunset shiver and want a pair of pants instead of her skirt. Her legs were tired, as was the rest of her body, as a result of getting blasted by pure magic. She was beginning to regret not taking the ride she had been offered. Since her own ride was at the shop, she had no method of transportation. She had only gotten to the dance thanks to Snip's mom dropping them off. Sunset sighed. Snips and Snails had given her the cold shoulder the entire night. She guessed turning them into demons only to have them changed back and punished alongside her had crossed some sort of line. She had lost her two stooges. Oh well, I can find more. Sunset frowned. No, she couldn't. No one would have the right mind to do anything for her after tonight. She wouldn't be able to get any more dirt on anyone in the school to compare to what she had done. Even if she could, what purpose would it serve? In 2 days, Twilight Sparkle had single-handedly stormed the school, united the students, and showed them all that they had one common enemy, Sunset Shimmer. She had been dethroned in less than a week, her dictatorship completely crushed and replaced by the magic of friendship. Sunset's nails bit into her palm. Whatever feelings the elements of harmony had forced her to feel were now gone, replaced by cold resentment and the bitter sting of defeat. She had almost had everything. Now, she had absolutely nothing. Something wet snaked down her cheek, and she wiped it away with the back of her hand. This is no time for a pity party. I already broke down in front of the whole school, which I will never live down, so no more crying. It's time to plan. There has gotta be some way for me to get back on top. Sunset stopped and leaned against a light post. She felt cold and exhausted, and judging by the area she was in, she was only a little over halfway home. Who am I kidding? I can't do anything here. The only thing I can do is wait for the portal to open and go back to Equestria. Maybe there I can try to find something that'll help me get back at Twilight Sparkle. She thought the idea of getting revenge on her mortal enemy would cheer her up. Instead, it only left a bitter taste in her mouth and her stomach churning. She pushed herself off the pole and kept walking. I need a bath and a long nap. She examined her favorite leather jacket and groaned. It had been horribly scuffed up and torn in a few places. She made a mental note to buy a new one. Sunset pulled her phone out of her jacket pocket and checked the time, reading just after midnight. Putting it away, she took a closer look at her surroundings. She had left behind the nicer neighborhoods and slew of family-owned businesses, and was nearing one of the seedier parts of Canterlot City. Old, dirty shops lined the streets, along with ridiculous amounts of trash and cigarette butts. Taking a shortcut through an abandoned playground, Sunset heard a loud scream tear through the night. She stopped and stared into the darkness, the only light source coming from a dying lamppost across the street. A girl quickly ran into view, and time slowed to a crawl while Sunset stared at her, mouth agape. She was wearing a simple navy blue shirt and jeans, with purple boots and a matching jacket. A familiar starburst was stitched into the corner, a starburst that made Sunset's eye twitch with fury. Twilight Sparkle ran down the street, fear written on her face as she screamed.
Help! Someone! Please help me!
Close behind her, two shady men chased after her, whistling and promising to do things that made Sunset's skin crawl. A jolt ran down her spine, and Sunset found herself chasing after the three of them. What the hell am I doing? She tried to stop, but found that she was almost in no control of her motor functions. She sprinted after the men, following them around the corner and into a wide alley where they had Twilight cornered against the back wall.
Don't worry, sweetie. We promised to go easy on you.
One of them snickered. Sunset scooped up a rock and threw it at them, hitting one square in the head. Hey, greaseballs! Why don't you pick on someone your own size? They spun around, both of them with greasy black hair and pale skin. Piercings lined their mouths and eyebrows. One of them was pretty thin, trying to hide it with his baggy jacket. The other man looked like he actually had some muscle.
Hey, girlie, you trying to pick a fight with us?
The muscular one asked.
'Cause it looks like you already lost one.
Both of them laughed.
Hey, she's kinda cute, though,
the skinny one observed.
How about one for each of us?
Sunset settled into a fighting stance, putting her arms up in front of her. She still wasn't sure why she was doing this. It was like an unknown force had taken control of her actions and forced her to come to Twilight's aid. Still, if it meant she got to beat two losers up and vent some frustration, she was all for it. How about you both forget her and come and take me on? Sunset said coolly.
Seriously, kid, you wanna fight us?
The skinny one asked. That would imply you two being an even match for me. I'm just gonna beat you into the ground.
All right, you asked for it.
The skinny one pulled out a switchblade and charged at Sunset, who sidestepped and ducked out of the way to avoid his wide swing. She then brought her fist upwards into a powerful uppercut, catching him in the jaw. Before he could stumble back, Sunset grabbed him by his arm and twisted his wrist, forcing him to drop the knife. She spun around and closed the distance between them, planting her feet firmly into the ground before lifting with all her might and flipping the gangster over her shoulder. He landed hard against the cement, groaning in pain and holding his bleeding mouth. Sunset turned and gestured with her hand to the remaining goon, who had only watched with open-mouthed fascination. It quickly turned into rage, and he barreled at Sunset with only his fists. Sunset jumped back, dodging the first swing, and catching the second one with the back of her wrist, knocking it away. She followed up by delivering a boot to his stomach, pushing him back some ways. He recovered and charged again like a raging bull, aiming a fist for Sunset's face. Sunset planted her feet again and grabbed it with both hands. Before the goon could catch her with his other fist, Sunset gave a sharp twist, electing a horrible crack from within his arm and drawing a cry of pain from the man. She released him and turned her body to the side, putting her hands together and bringing her elbow against his chest. The gangster wheezed and dropped to his knees before falling flat on his face, groaning in pain like his partner. Wiping her hands on her skirt, Sunset stepped over the man's body and exited the alley, casting one last glare back at Twilight, who was still huddled against the wall. Sunset rolled her eyes and turned the corner, continuing down the road like nothing had happened. That was fun, I guess. Got a little anger out at least.
Wait!
Twilight's voice called after her, dampening Sunset's mood again. Sunset ignored her and picked up the pace.
Where are you going?
Twilight shouted at her, finally having left the alley. Home, Sunset said automatically.
Wait, please, come back for a second.
Sunset immediately stopped and did an about-face, her legs betraying her desire to walk away. What the heck is going on? She found herself marching back and stopping in front of Twilight, who, Sunset noticed, was a few inches shorter than the other Twilight. "What?" Sunset growled.
Well, I just...
Twilight wrung her hands, looking embarrassed.
Why did you save me?
She finally asked. Sunset shrugged. "I don't know."
Oh,
Twilight moved her hands behind her back.
well, it was pretty cool to watch.
"I'm so glad you enjoyed the show." With that, Sunset was finally able to pull herself away from the purple-haired nuisance and resume her trek home.
Wait,
Twilight jogged to catch up with Sunset's fast pace.
can I at least know your name, please?
"Sunset Shimmer," Sunset responded before she could even think about it. "Why would I tell her my name?" "Whatever, it's not like it matters."
Well, Sunset Shimmer, I'm pretty sure you saved my life.
"Whoop-de-doo for me," Sunset said, twirling a finger in the air. Twilight cocked her head.
You don't sound too happy about it.
"Oh no, trust me, I'm absolutely thrilled." Twilight sighed.
Anyway, I just wanted to say...
Sunset whirled around and jabbed a finger at her. "Listen, Twilight, I don't care."
How do you know my name?
"Because I already know who you are." Sunset clapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with realization. "Smooth move, Sunset."
You know who I am?
Sunset's hand flew from her mouth. "Well, technically I know the other you that came from the mirror, so I know you by proxy." She slapped both hands over her mouth this time. "Something is wrong. Something is very, very wrong." Twilight was looking absolutely mystified.
Mirror? What are you talking about?
Sunset tried her hardest not to say anything, to just keep silent and keep walking, but it was like a force similar to the one that made her chase after Twilight's assailants was now making her speak words she would have normally never said. "The mirror that leads to Equestria and opens every 30 moons, she blurted before covering her mouth again. Twilight, now looking concerned, took a few steps back.
Are you okay?
"No, I'm not okay!" Sunset yelled.
Okay!
Twilight held her hands up.
Please, just take a deep breath.
Sunset found that she didn't have a choice in this matter, her lungs and mouth operating on their own accord. She took in a long, steady breath and exhaled slowly.
Feeling better?
"No!" If anything, Sunset felt even more unnerved now. These actions, these responses, they weren't done by choice. As Twilight opened her mouth again, Sunset flew forward and covered it. "Stop it. No more questions. Just stop talking. Listen to me. It doesn't matter how I know you, okay? Yes, I saved your life, but it doesn't mean anything. Just go home and pretend this never happened, and never, ever talk to me again." Not waiting for a response, Sunset broke into a run, getting away from Twilight as fast as she could. Luckily, Twilight did not call after her. "What the hell was that? Why would I say any of that to her? Why would I do any of that for her? Okay, fine. Maybe I would have stopped those thugs without whatever it was making me do it. Not even Twilight Sparkle deserves, well, what they wanted to do to her. Ugh, why is she even around here anyway?" Sunset didn't stop running until she was almost home. Her lungs burned and her legs and feet ached horribly. She stopped and doubled over, panting for breath. Damn it. That stupid girl. It's like the universe is content to torture me with her. Standing up straight, she took a deep breath and walked the last leg of her journey. She was now on the edge of the industrial district of Canterlot's eastern side. Most were rundown buildings signed for demolition, but the city had never gotten around to actually doing it. Sunset slipped down a narrow alley and stopped at a blue door built into the side of one of the abandoned factories. She twisted the knob and gave the door a heavy shove with her shoulder, unsticking it and granting her access. She reached for the light switch she knew was on the wall next to her, and a series of dim bulbs sprung to life, illuminating the black and white checkered hallway. After closing the tight door behind her, Sunset made her way down the hall, turning at the first set of staircases to her left. At the top was a door with "Employees Only" scratched into it, and was just beyond Sunset's room or what had previously been the foreman's office. She stepped inside and flicked another switch, awakening the single naked bulb that hung from the middle of the ceiling. The room had been modified to resemble something closer to a bedroom. An old wardrobe sat in the corner closest to the door, and a cracked full-body-sized mirror leaned against the wall next to it. Her bed, or mattress really, was tucked into the opposite corner. The wall right across from her was a mostly glass screen that looked down at the manufacturing plant, which had long since been emptied, leaving just a large vacant room. Sunset had kept the foreman's desk that had been left over, leaving it in its spot in front of the glass. A small window was placed on the adjacent wall, just big enough to let sunlight through in the early morning. Sunset hadn't bothered to decorate her room with much of anything else. The only thing that gave the room a touch of personality were the previous crowns she had won from past dances. They sat on her desk, neatly arranged in orderly fashion. The spring fling crown she had won in her freshman year when she had pretended she was a second semester transfer student, followed by the sophomore and junior year editions. Then came the 2 winter ball crowns and the 2 fall formal crowns, leaving a space for the crown she should have won tonight. Exhausted, Sunset fell onto her bed, too tired to think about crowns or her lack thereof. She wanted to know why she had intervened for Twilight like she did. It was like she had no control of her body and was made to do someone else's will. It had to be magic. She let out a loud yawn, her eyes growing heavy. But what kind of magic could do something like that? Her eyes fluttered closed as sleep began to overtake her. Before it could claim her properly, her eyes snapped open and she shot up into a sitting position, a faint, harmonic voice playing in her head. Until you can learn to love others above yourself, you shall be at their whim and mercy, aiding them whenever they ask for it, and telling them only the truth. Sunset's eyes contracted to pinpricks as the words replayed in her head. A lump of cold dread settled like a rock in her stomach. Oh no. Long Road to Friendship by the Albino Corn. Chapter 3. Single-Minded Solitude. Sunset was surprised at the amount of sleep she had gotten last night. Pulling out her phone from her discarded jacket, she checked the time as well past 1 in the afternoon. She rubbed the sleep out of her eyes and moved herself to a sitting position, noticing she had fallen asleep in the clothes she had worn yesterday, save for her leather jacket which laid on the floor at the foot of her bed. She sat in the dimness of her room, light weakly falling in from the window above her. The only other source of light came from the high windows on the manufacturing floor, but, like Sunset's personal window, they were small, and let in meager amounts of sun. Sighing, Sunset fell back against her pillow, her arms splayed out to her sides. The events of last night played in her head like a movie, a really bad movie, at least from her perspective. Sunset rolled onto her side, drawing her blanket closer to her neck. She thought she would be up all night dreading over what the elements had done to her. Instead, she instantly clocked out. She guessed her overly exhausted body overrode her mental fears. Now that she was awake, she had all the time in the world to worry over her new predicament. With a loud groan, Sunset forced herself out of the bed, steadying herself against the wall as the world spun for a moment. After she had regained her bearings, she dragged herself over to her wardrobe and flung it open, grabbing some undergarments and a pair of pajamas. Today was Saturday, meaning Sunset had no obligations whatsoever. With her change of clothes in hand, Sunset tracked down the stairs and further down the checkered hallway. Fortunately, the factory she had picked as her home came with a small workers' quarters that included a kitchen and a bathroom with a working shower. Unfortunately for her, the water was always cold. Stepping into the small bathroom, Sunset turned the shower handle, starting the spray of cold water. She placed her spare change of clothes on the table next to the sink and undressed, dropping her filthy undergarments unceremoniously onto the floor. After taking a few deep breaths, Sunset stepped into the shower, feeling the icy sting of the freezing water biting against her bare skin. She instantly began to shiver and hugged her chest out of instinct, trying to keep some of her body heat. "Cold, cold, cold," she said through chattering teeth. Feeling the goosebumps coat her entire body, she decided to make the unpleasant experience as quick as possible. She grabbed the bar of soap sitting in its dish and furiously began scrubbing up the dirt that covered her, easing up around the bruises she had received. When she was finished, she took the bottle of shampoo and squeezed a giant glob out of it, making quick work of washing her hair. When all the soap suds had vanished down the drain, Sunset shut the shower off and hopped out onto the mat, snatching her towel off the rack and wrapping it around her body. She was still shivering, but the fluffy towel was helping restore warmth to her body. When was the last time I took a hot shower? She couldn't remember. Perhaps it hadn't been since she left Equestria. She frowned, hoping it really hadn't been that long.
Securing the towel around herself, Sunset stepped over to the sink and opened the pantry behind the mirror, pulling out her toothbrush and toothpaste. Her body went into autopilot as she went through the mundane task of brushing her teeth. All right, what do I do now? The question from last night pushed itself to the front of her mind. What could she do now? She was trapped in a foreign world, forced to go to a school where she hated everyone, and now the feeling was mutual. Simply put, she was banished. Oh, but wait, there's more. I'm now cursed. She spat into the sink and glared at her reflection, which only glared back. So, the only reason I helped Twilight Sparkle was because she asked me to help her, which is also why I said all those things to her. So, if I've got this straight, anytime someone asks me to do something, I have to do it. And if they ask me a question, I have to answer it. She resumed brushing her teeth at furious speeds, ignoring the pain she was inflicting on her gums.
That's just great. Fan-freaking-tastic. So this is my penance, is it? Yeah, real harmonious of you, Elements. Force me to help someone when they ask for it.
She spat again, scowling before a grin split her face. Wait, who in their right mind is going to ask anything from me? No one at the school even likes me. Ha! After rinsing her mouth, Sunset finished drying off and slipped into her warm pajamas. Exiting the bathroom, she walked across the hall to the kitchen to fill her growling stomach. On the other hand, she opened the refrigerator door and grabbed a carton of milk. I might have to live with this for the rest of my life, or at least until I love someone more than myself, or something stupid like that. She frowned again, no longer feeling so confident. Grabbing a box of cereal and a bowl from the cabinets, Sunset seated herself to a simple breakfast. She said, in between spoonfuls. I'm probably going to need more food soon. And some new clothes. Since her favorite ensemble was trashed, Sunset was down one pair of clothes in her already small selection. But buying items was something that required money, something she knew she was running out of. She didn't have Flash Sentry to buy her things anymore, and the savings that she had accumulated from bullying the lower-classmen out of their lunch money was starting to dwindle. The way things were going, Sunset would be forced to get, she gagged on the next word, a job. She gave a groan of frustration. She couldn't believe how fast things could go downhill. Finishing her cereal and dumping the bowl into the sink, she made a mental note to wash the growing pile later. She stomped her way back to her room, slamming the door as hard as she could to vent some frustration. There had to be a simple solution that could fix all of her problems, but unless magic suddenly sprung up in this world, Sunset couldn't see it. She took a seat at her desk and pressed the palms of her hands against her eyes.
Come on, Sunset, think of something. You've always got a plan.
She sat there for hours, scheming ideas and theories, each one more ridiculous and desperate than the last. With each one she discarded, she became more frustrated, shouting and pounding her fist against the wooden desk. She felt like a wild animal caught in a hunter's trap and unable to escape. She had told the spirits residing in the elements of harmony that she knew she had lost. She just didn't know how bad her defeat really was until now. Maybe I should stay here for the rest of my life. She put her arms up on the desk and rested her head on them, feeling dismayed and hopeless. Even that plan had its flaws. If she didn't show up at school, people would ask questions, and if they asked questions, they would go looking for answers. And if they went looking for answers, they would find things that could get Sunset into trouble with this world's law enforcement. Despite her feelings of resentment, she was glad Celestia had decided not to turn Sunset over to the police for what happened last night. She wondered how the school was going to spin the events when the reporters came snooping. Closing her eyes, Sunset focused on the heart of the matter. Her penance. There was no way she could get through the rest of her life without people asking things of her. Her run-in with Twilight had been proof of that.
Something until I make friends and care about other people more than me,
Sunset mumbled into her arm. They were really going to force her to play this game. Force her to make friends. She dug her nails into the sleeves of her pajama top.
Who says I want any friends? I've gotten by on my own just fine. I don't need friends. I don't need family. I only need myself.
Sunday found Sunset at her desk, having sulked there until she had fallen asleep. She groaned, sitting up and rolling out a crick in her neck. Her mood had not improved in the slightest, but she knew she couldn't hide away in her room forever. Why should she cower from the world? She was Sunset Shimmer, former student of Princess Celestia. She wouldn't let a stupid enchantment stop her from realizing greatness. She'd find a way to outsmart or remove the curse, and she could do it without the help of anyone else. With her newfound confidence, Sunset got up and selected a pair of casual clothes from her wardrobe. She decided today was as good as any to go shopping. After repeating yesterday's ritual of showering and getting dressed, Sunset grabbed her wallet and stuffed it into her jacket pocket. Finding a suitable replacement for her leather jacket was priority number 1. After picking an apple from the kitchen, Sunset headed out the door, slamming it shut behind her. She shielded her eyes from the sudden burst of sunlight that greeted her face upon exiting the slender alley. After taking a moment to adjust, Sunset headed for the nearest bus stop a block away. While she hated public transportation, it beat walking all the way to the other side of town. "I can wait until my motorcycle is fixed," Sunset said under her breath. She finished her apple and tossed the core into a nearby yard. "It'll decompose eventually," she thought. There was only one other man upon Sunset's arrival at the bus stop. He had a nice suit on and was holding a briefcase in one hand. Sunset snickered to herself, feeling sorry for the saps that had to work on a Sunday. "Oh, excuse me, miss." The man addressed Sunset as she drew near. "Could you tell me the time?" Sunset wanted to tell him to invest in a watch instead, but found her hand reaching into her pocket to grab her phone. "It's 12:23, she said, trying to keep the snark out of her voice. "And do you know how often the bus comes through here?" "About every 15 minutes. The man smiled. "Thanks. You've been a big help." Sunset grunted and turned away. It had only been 2 days, and she was already thoroughly annoyed by her curse. "Oh, come on. He just wanted to know the time," a small voice said. Sunset rolled her eyes in response. "It's a beautiful day out, isn't it?" the man continued. Sunset looked up at the clear blue sky. A calm wind tousled hair. "Yeah, it is," she said softly. She couldn't have been more relieved when the bus arrived a minute later. She paid her fare and picked a seat near the back, getting as far away from the man and the rest of the scattered passengers aboard as possible. Lucky for her, the bus ride passed without incident. 30 minutes later, she was on Canterlot's nicer side, disembarking in front of the Canterlot Mall. It was a large monstrosity of a thing, with its front being made mostly of polished glass, giving it the nickname the Crystal Mall. Though it was only 2 stories high, it could fill the space of 2 football stadiums. She crossed through the large sliding doors and pulled out her list of things to buy, seeing leather jacket at the top. Having been here several times prior, Sunset knew exactly where to buy one. She stepped across the glittering, tiled floors, heading for the closest escalator. Despite the flaws of this world, Sunset had been greatly impressed by the technology here. She had been blown away by the concept of moving stairs upon seeing them the first time. Why didn't Equestria have something like that? Or leather jackets? Groups of teens and families moved about the mall, enjoying their weekend outing, and filling the place with echoes of talk and laughter. To Sunset, it was almost infectious. Almost. She found the store she had been looking for after a few minutes of walking and stepped inside, a wide grin on her face.
"Afternoon,"
the store clerk said with a cheery disposition, until she saw who it was who walked through the door. Her face instantly fell.
"Oh, it's you, Sunset."
Sunset paused and looked at the pale blue girl across the counter. A bright pink bow sat on her aqua-colored hair. It took a moment, but Sunset finally recalled the girl's name. "Good afternoon, Flitter," she said coolly, approaching the counter with a smirk. "I didn't know you worked here."
"Yes, well, unlike some people, I have to work for the things I want."
"Oh, Bill, life is just so hard and unfair." Sunset couldn't resist taunting her. Old habits seemed to die hard. "For your information, I have worked for the things I wanted." Flitter narrowed her eyes.
"No, you haven't. You've cheated, lied, and blackmailed."
"And that isn't work?" Flitter grumbled a few unkind words to herself before readdressing Sunset with as much contempt as she could muster.
"What do you want?"
"A leather jacket." Sunset wasn't sure whether she said it, or if it was the elements making her. Flitter pointed to the back corner where a small rack of black and brown jackets sat.
"Please let me know if there's anything I can do to help you,"
she said, her voice heavy with sarcasm. Sunset smiled and made her way over to the rack. She picked out a large brown one and pretended to examine it closely.
No.
She dropped it to the floor and moved down a row, picking out another one.
No.
She said, tossing it on top of the previous one. From the corner of her eye, she saw Flitter grind her teeth together. Sunset continued her mischief until she pulled out a jacket she actually liked. It looked exactly like the old one she was wearing, only it had a longer trim and silver-pointed spikes along the cuffs.
Oh, yes, you'll make a great replacement.
She took the jacket over and laid it on the counter in front of Flitter, who let out a long sigh.
Will that be all, ma'am?
Yes. Flitter clicked a few buttons on the cash register before taking the scanner and scanning the tag on the jacket. Her face brightened up, and when she spoke, her original cheeriness had returned.
That'll be $322, please.
Sunset nearly choked.
What?
You've got to be kidding me. It didn't cost that much last time.
Well,
Flitter explained with a large smile.
leather happens to be very in season right now, and this particular jacket is imported.
She leaned in towards Sunset and added an overjoyed whisper.
From France.
It was Sunset's turn to grit her teeth. I don't have $300. Flitter shrugged, taking the jacket and moving towards the mess Sunset had made.
Too bad. No money, no jacket. Maybe you should come join us, commoners in the working world and, I don't know, actually work for it.
Sunset opened her mouth, but Flitter beat her to it.
Oh, and if you threaten me, I will call security.
With a stomp and a clench of her fists, Sunset marched out of the store, swearing profusely.
Stupid Flitter, $300 jacket. A really nice jacket. Where the hell am I supposed to get $300 extra to pay for that?
Keeping her head down and muttering darkly to herself, Sunset didn't see where she was going and smacked straight into another person, sending them to the floor. Sunset glared down at them.
Why don't you just watch where you're going? Twilight Sparkle.
Twilight got up and dusted herself, giving Sunset a curious stare.
Sunset Shimmer? What are you doing here? Why'd you bump into me?
Instead of a scathing retort, Sunset said, I was here trying to buy a new jacket along with a few other things, but I found out the jacket I wanted was too expensive and I got mad and I wasn't looking where I was going. She facepalmed.
Oh, I see. Well, I'm sorry about the jacket,
Twilight said sincerely.
Maybe you can ask for it for Christmas.
I don't really have anyone to ask for anything for Christmas. Sunset crossed her arms and looked away.
You don't?
No, I don't, and I like it that way. Sunset snapped her head back at Twilight and held up a hand. Oh, wait a minute. Do you not remember what I told you 2 nights ago? Twilight rubbed a hand against the back of her neck, her expression caught between guilty and sad.
To not talk to you?
Yes. And what are you doing right now?
Well, technically you bumped into me and initiated the conversation.
She fell silent at the look at Sunset's face. Sunset was enjoying this domination over Twilight. She only wished it had been this easy to put down the other one. I'll say again, leave me alone! She turned on her heel and started to storm off.
Can I at least say thank you?
Sunset stopped and looked over her shoulder. For what? Twilight clasped her hands behind her back nervously and kicked at the floor, a move that reminded Sunset of Fluttershy.
Or saving my life. I never got a chance to say thanks.
Yeah, well... Sunset found she couldn't think of a good comeback and instead just said, You're welcome. She turned to walk away again, but Twilight's voice stopped her.
What were you talking about Friday night? About the mirror to Equestria, was it? Something about another me?
That's none of your business, Sunset snapped. Technically, that's true. None of it really is her business. Twilight put her hands on her hips and scowled.
Why isn't it? You said there was another Twilight Sparkle.
Sunset found herself forced to turn around and answer. Yes, there's another Twilight Sparkle, but you'll never meet her, so it doesn't matter. With a frustrated growl, Sunset broke into a run, pushing past other mall-goers in her attempt to flee.
Wait! Come back here! You owe me an explanation! I owe you nothing!
Ignoring the stares of everyone she passed by, Sunset continued running until she was sure Twilight hadn't followed her. She stopped, catching her breath at the water fountain and taking a long drink, wiping her mouth on her sleeve afterwards. Wait. Sunset looked back at the way she had run. Twilight asked me for an explanation, but I wasn't forced to give her one. Sunset leaned against the wall, pressing a palm against her head. Well, no, she demanded one. Guess that isn't the same as just asking. She grit her teeth and pounded a fist against the wall.
Stupid girl! Stupid curse! Is this how I'm going to spend the rest of my life, running away from questions?
No, it was just Twilight Sparkle she had to avoid. She was the only problem. She was always the problem.
Long Road to Friendship by the Albino Corn. Chapter 4. The Canterlot High Five. Sunset walked back home from the Canterlot High campus. Her arms and legs sore from another day of manual labor. Never so much did she wish she had her magic powers back. Laying concrete and bricks? That's earth pony work, she grumbled. Her hands were filthy and crusted with dried cement, matching her clothes. She looked down at the gray splatter that Snails had accidentally spilled over her shirt. But Sunset had a feeling it was on purpose. Unfortunately, there had been witnesses around, so Sunset couldn't threaten to severely hurt him later. She was too tired to do it anyway. For the past 4 days, Sunset had gotten up early and dragged herself down to the school to help repair the damage she had done. It had occurred to her to simply skip out on her punishment and let the professional construction workers do all the work, but she had decided she was in enough trouble as it was. Besides, if she didn't do this, Celestia might ask her to do something even more unpleasant. Then she'd have no choice. During her work, Sunset had found the time to ponder more of the nature of her penance and what exactly triggered it. The first time she had run into this world's Twilight Sparkle, she had been practically trapped by the constant assault of questions. But when Sunset had met her in the mall, she had been able to escape, even though Twilight demanded a response. She had compiled all of the instances together, adding in all the times one of the workers asked her for something, and concluded that her curse was mostly favor-based. If someone asked for something, she had to comply, but if it was an order, she wasn't obliged to say yes. Apparently, the word please also triggered it. Sunset took small comfort knowing she couldn't be ordered around by technically, but having to do what others asked of her still stung and aggravated her like a nasty bug bite. One more day, Sunset, just one more day. By tomorrow, all of the repairs would be finished, and school could resume the following Monday. Then, all Sunset would have to worry about was a month of detention. She huffed. It wasn't like she had anything better to do. There was a low rumble from her stomach, and Sunset decided she had a craving for something sweet. She still had some cash after going grocery shopping earlier that week, so she decided to stop by the Sugar Cube Corner pastry shop. She paused and zipped up her jacket, covering the ugly stain on her shirt. People already thought she was a monster. She didn't want them to think she was a dirty street urchin, too. She found the shop, true to its name, sitting on the corner of Sugar Cube Street. Once she pushed the door open and stepped inside, all of the conversation stopped. Sunset recognized almost all of the customers as students from school. They all looked at her with mixtures of surprise, interest, and fear. Or maybe that was anger. Sunset couldn't tell, nor did she particularly care. Sunset quickly grew agitated with a silent pause. "What are you all looking at?" she demanded, stomping her boot against the floor. The students stared at her for a few more seconds before going back to their conversations, now spoken in hushed tones. She balled her fists and marched over to the counter, but it wasn't like her usual haughty and assertive walk. It was a march of shame, further burdened by the judgment eyes of her peers weighing down on her conscience.
"How can I help you?"
Mrs. Cake asked in a rather cool tone. Sunset knew for a fact she wasn't in good graces with the cakes. "I'll just have a strawberry cupcake and a scone," Sunset sighed. Mrs. Cake pulled the two objects from their respective trays and placed them in a bag before ringing Sunset up. Sunset paid the amount, and as she turned to leave, her eyes ran over 5 horribly familiar faces sitting in a booth near the front.
"Just ignore them, Sunset. Just keep walking."
She started a brisk pace towards the door. "Hey, Sunset," Applejack called out. "Could you come here a sec?"
"Damn it!"
Sunset felt a jolt down her spine, and her legs brought her over to the 5 girls.
"What?"
she asked curtly. Applejack pointed to an empty chair nearby. "Sit down with us for a minute." Sunset didn't really want to, but since they were probably going to ask her again, she saved herself the trouble and took a seat. All right, what do you want? Well, Applejack coughed into her hand, looking around at her friends. No one else said anything, so she continued. We just wanted to see how you're doing. Really? Sunset crossed her arms. Looking at each of them in turn, she measured her disdain for all of them. Applejack and her annoying southern accent and ridiculous hat. Rainbow Dash glared back at her while she sipped on a smoothie. As much as Sunset hated her, she had to admit she admired Rainbow's guts the occasional time she stood up to her. Fluttershy fiddled with her hair, looking nervous. Spineless coward. Pinkie Pie bounced in her seat, the only one looking excited to be here. Her constant optimistic demeanor and happy-go-lucky attitude made Sunset want to tear her hair out. How can one person be so annoying? Then there was Rarity, the prima donna wannabe cheerleader who wanted the whole school to look up to her. Sunset would have hated her more if they didn't have that in common. Yes, really, Applejack insisted. Look, I know we've all had our differences in the past, but I was thinking now would be a good time to put them behind us and start fresh. Start fresh? Sunset honestly couldn't believe this was happening. You girls seriously want to be my friends? She asked with a laugh. Pinkie Pie nodded her head fervently.
Uh-huh. Maybe if you had some friends, you wouldn't be such a meanie. And I mean, come on. You could never have too many friends.
Sunset furrowed her brow. These girls must think I'm stupid. Okay, let me ask you this. Do you girls really want to be my friend, or are you just doing this as a favor to Twilight Sparkle? 3 out of 5 faces changed from warm and inviting to looks of guilt. Pinkie Pie still wore her smile and said,
Both.
Fluttershy sunk in her seat, trying to look as small as possible.
Oh, it's not that. Well, it kind of is that, but we do kind of want to be your friends.
She grew quiet and hid behind her pink cascade of hair. Applejack rubbed the back of her neck. All right, yes, we did make a promise to Twilight, but I honestly want to try to help you, Sunset. Sunset raised a brow at the sincere look in her eye. These weren't exactly the answers she was expecting. She turned and looked at Rainbow Dash, whose face remained as impassive as when Sunset first approached them. Rainbow caught her eye and said,
I'm just doing this as a favor. I still don't like you. And if it weren't for them, I wouldn't have agreed to this. Let me remind you that over the past 3 years, you've torn our friendship apart, bullied everyone beneath you, humiliated practically everyone in the school at least once.
Her voice had grown more intense as she spoke, and by this point, Rainbow was standing up, her face red with anger.
Oh, and yeah, let's not forget the best part. You turned into a demon and tried to kill us.
The shop went quiet again. All eyes on Rainbow this time as she stood in her seat, breathing like she had just run a lap around the track at top speed. She fell back into the cushion, crossed her arms, and stared out the window.
So forgive me if I don't feel like exchanging warm fuzzies with you.
That was the answer Sunset had been expecting, though she hated to admit that it stung a bit more than she thought it would have. And what about you, Rarity? Sunset faced the last member who hadn't given their opinion. The noise level in the shop had risen back to a low murmur as Rarity sat in quiet contemplation. Her eyes were closed and she held her head in her hand.
Well, Sunset, Rainbow is right. Ever since you first showed up freshman year, you've been nothing but trouble, slowly getting worse and becoming downright evil as time went by.
She opened her eyes and stared right into Sunset's with an expression that was neither judgmental nor angry but seemed to pierce all the same. She continued,
You've lied, blackmailed, cheated, stolen, ridiculed, threatened, and hurt almost everyone around you. You've done nothing for the sake of anyone other than yourself. And since last Friday, we all saw you for what you truly were.
Sunset found herself sliding down in her own seat. Rainbow's words had stung, but the way Rarity delivered them seemed to just cut at her. She didn't yell them. She just laid them out plain as day. It was almost like listening to the element's spirits again.
However,
Rarity's gaze softened.
You also showed great remorse that night. Yes, I made a promise to a friend. But I know that we can't force you to do anything you don't want to do. Why not?
Rainbow interrupted.
She forced everyone else to do things they didn't want to do.
Applejack smacked her with her hat. Hush, Rainbow. Let Rarity finish. Rarity cleared her throat.
As I was saying, if you don't want to be our friend, then fine. That's your decision. But if you honestly meant what you said, that you were sorry and didn't know any other way, then I'm willing to help show you how wonderful it is to make friends instead of driving people apart.
Sunset was silent. A turbulent storm of thoughts and feelings rolled through her. Most of them genuinely wanted to be her friend despite what she had done to them in the past, especially Rarity, even after what had happened at the spring fling.
Did I actually mean it when I said I was sorry? Sorry I failed, yes, but the rest of it, was that me? Or just the elements talking?
Sunset definitely felt something when Rarity had thrown all of her actions back in her face. Perhaps she really did feel remorse. Sunset scrunched her face. This was going against everything she had believed in. She didn't need friends, and she hated everyone at this table. Still, at this point, they were the only ones who would even consider being friends with her. Anyone else would laugh in her face. Then Sunset would have to knock their teeth out. They were the only people who could help lift the curse set on her. As much as she loathed to admit it, she needed them.
Just until the curse is gone. Then I'm back on my own.
She raised her head and looked back at their expectant faces. With a deep breath, she said,
Fine. I guess I would like...
She clenched her teeth and said with a strained voice,
I would like to try and be... friends.
Pinkie Pie lunged across the table and tackled Sunset into a tight hug, nearly knocking her to the floor.
Oh my gosh, this is going to be so amazing! You can come hang out with us and we'll have sleepovers and parties and go to the movies and mall together. It's going to be so much fun, I can't stand it! We can do the Caroline high five! Oh wait, there's 6 of us now. Oh, I know! We can do the main 6! You know, like M-A-N-E, because we're the Wonder Cults! Oh, I'm just so excited!
Pinkie, if you don't let go of me, I will be forced to hurt you.
Pinkie Pie unwrapped her arms from Sunset and scooted back across the table looking sheepish. Rarity reached over and patted her shoulder.
Baby steps, dear. Baby steps.
She smiled back at Sunset.
Still, I'm glad you did accept our offer.
Yeah, well, it's not like I had much of a choice.
Sunset muttered, dusting herself off.
First rule, don't touch me.
It was mostly directed at Pinkie and her love of hugs. Pinkie slumped in her chair.
Oh.
Sunset crossed her arms again.
So, now what?
Well,
Fluttershy spoke, having lifted herself back up in her seat. She pressed her fingertips together in a nervous manner.
Since we're friends, why don't you tell us something about yourself?
I'm a magical unicorn from another dimension, and I used to be Princess Celestia's best student.
Sunset said automatically. Wait, you're from that other place too? Applejack asked.
Yes, didn't Twilight tell you that?
They all shook their heads. Rainbow Dash leaned forward.
And did you say you were Princess Celestia's student? I thought Twilight was a princess.
Sunset sighed. She was regretting this friendship thing already.
Yes, I was Celestia's student. She's a princess in that world. A super powerful one at that. But yeah, Twilight's a princess too. The rite of ascension has to be earned, and I guess she earned it.
Sunset added bitterly.
Did you know Twilight back there?
Pinkie asked.
No, I didn't. I didn't learn about her until sometime later when I was inspecting the portal again. On full moons, if you concentrate really hard, you can see back into Equestria. I saw some of the study sessions she and Celestia had together in the throne room.
There was a pang of sadness in Sunset's heart, and she quickly stood up to leave.
Second rule, don't ask me any more questions about Equestria or Twilight Sparkle.
She turned on her heel and began to walk out when Pinkie called out to her.
Oh wait, Sunset. We're going to the street fair on Saturday. You want to come with us?
No.
Oh, come on, please. It's something friends do.
All right, I'll go. Damn it.
Pinky cheered and Sunset rolled her eyes, heading out the front door. She was halfway through when she realized she was missing something. She turned around and marched back to the table, smacking Pinky's hand as she reached for the bag of treats Sunset had almost left.
Rule 3. Touch my stuff, and I will hurt you.
Pinky gave her another sheepish grin. Long Road to Friendship, Chapter 5. There was a thud as Sunset dropped the last can of paint into the back of the truck. She rubbed her fingers on her jeans, smearing the leftover paint across them and making a face of disgust. She turned from the curbside and admired a week's worth of hard work that had resulted in the new front wall of the school. It more or less looked the same. Principal Celestia said the school budget couldn't allow them to spring for anything fancy. Still, Sunset felt some satisfaction knowing that she had helped rebuild it with her own blood, sweat, and tears, and she vowed never to do it again. She had almost been able to sneak away the second they'd put in the front door, but one of the workers had politely asked her to help stay and clean everything up. And Sunset just couldn't say no. Cleanup had taken another hour of Sunset's time. Not that she had much to do, but still, anything beat working longer than she had to. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon when the construction workers finally left, leaving Snips, Snails, and Sunset alone in front of the school. The two boys were talking to one another, while Sunset rested against the statue, her arms tired from another day of manual labor. Just as the two boys began walking away, Sunset called out to them. She had something that she needed to get off her chest, and it had taken days to finally work up the nerve to say it. "Snip, Snails!" she barked. It hadn't meant to come out that way. She was just so used to addressing them as nothing more than servants. They both flinched before slowly turning around, like two children who had been caught stealing sweets from the kitchen. Their large, puppy-dog eyes made Sunset purse her lips and cross her arms out of habit. That was usually the expression they gave her when they had bad news to deliver. And they knew she hated bad news. Snips rubbed the back of his neck, trying to avoid Sunset's gaze.
Listen, Sunset, we can't, we don't want to hang out with you anymore.
Yeah, Snails continued, taking slow steps backward. My mom said you're a bad influence. We don't want to get into any more trouble. Both of them proceeded to duck and cover their faces in preparation for Sunset's imminent lashing. She watched them stay like that for a whole minute, honestly thinking whether or not she should hit them one last time. When the beating never came, Snails uncurled himself and looked up at Sunset with a more than usual dim-witted expression. Aren't you gonna hit us? No. Do you want me to hit you? Snips covered Snail's mouth.
No, we're good,
he said hastily. All right, then. Sunset stared at them, trying to find the right words to say. She had never really apologized for anything before, at least not in her sole free will. She rolled her head back and looked up at the salmon-colored sky, sighing. Listen, you two. I just wanted to say... She mumbled something that was lost on the gentle wind.
What?
Snips and Snails asked simultaneously. I said I'm sorry, okay? She brought her gaze back to them. It must have been unnerving because both of them flinched again. I'm sorry you guys got dragged down with me. You two were just following orders. None of this was your fault, so I'm sorry. Sunset fought the urge to gag. The very act of asking for forgiveness made her feel sick to her stomach. But some small part of her, an annoying part that she was becoming more and more aware of, felt like she at least needed to apologize to the two she had treated like helper monkeys for the past year. Both of them gave her stares of incomprehension. They looked at each other, then back to Sunset, then to each other again.
Sunset, are you?
Snips was cut off by a wave of Sunset's hand. No questions. Just know that I said sorry, okay? You don't have to accept it, but it's there. She started walking down the road, past Snips and Snails, who flinched once more. She had reached the corner when Snips called back to her.
Sunset, thanks, I guess. For what it's worth, not all of it was bad.
Snails nodded. Yeah, turning into monsters was pretty cool. It was just like Halloween.
Sunset just shook her head and kept walking. Idiots, she mumbled. Still, she was glad they didn't outright hate her. Under different circumstances, Sunset could have easily manipulated them back into working for her, but now her heart just wasn't in it. She wanted to be cruel. She wanted to be spiteful. She wanted to blame everyone around her and lash out with revenge. But every passing day, Sunset was finding it harder and harder to deny that she was in the wrong. The fault was hers. Well, mostly. She could still find some solace in blaming Princess Twilight Sparkle and her friends. Unfortunately, that solace quickly melted into annoyance when she remembered she now had to be friends with them. It was just one defeat after another, beaten, cursed, and now forced to be friends with the people who put her in the situation in the first place. Just until I can trick the elements into getting this curse off me, then I'm going to get my revenge and get as far away from them as possible. She knew it was easier said than done. Tomorrow would be her first test. A whole day at the street fair. She gave an involuntary shudder at the thought. There were about 1,000 things she'd rather do than spend a whole day with the 5 of them. I wonder if I tie myself up so I can't leave. Sunset blanched. All right, now I'm just being ridiculous. Sunset awoke to the sound of the repetitive ringing of her alarm buzzing in her ears. She took her pillow and slammed it over her head, trying to drown the noise out. Eventually, common sense returned to her, and she reached out to slap the alarm clock, shutting it off. Peaceful silence reigned throughout her room once more. Sunset closed her eyes in relief, eager to go back to sleep. Technically, Pinky never said when I had to be there. Sunset was now inclined to believe that the universe hated her, for at that moment she could hear her phone ring in her jacket pocket. Don't pick it up. Just leave it alone. You might be able to get out of this one on technicality. The phone continued to emit its high-pitched ring, persistent on being answered. Sunset matched its persistence with her stubbornness, refusing to move out of her comfortable spot. As the phone rang and rang, the question of how any of them had gotten her phone number popped into her head. She made it a point to ask them the next time she saw them. After an hour, Sunset was ready to chuck her phone out the window. She crawled out of bed and thrust her hand into her jacket pocket, snatching her phone and checking the screen. 157 missed calls, 156, bing, 157 voicemails, 50 text messages, all of them from one number. The phone vibrated in Sunset's hand, begging to be answered. Just throw it, Sunset. Rip out the battery. Ignore it. Just for the love of Celestia, don't pick it up. Sunset's thumb unflipped the phone and she held it up to her ear. Hello? Damn it, girl. Why?
Oh my gosh, Sunset, I was starting to think you were never going to pick up.
Pinky's shrill voice drilled into Sunset's brain.
Were you asleep? I bet you were asleep. I mean, it's Saturday. I just love sleeping in on Saturdays, but I love hanging out with my friends even more. And it's 11. Anyway, my granny pa used to always say to me, the early bird catches the worm. Which is a weird thing, because we aren't birds, and we definitely don't eat worms. Oh, before I forget, we're all going to meet at the corner of 3rd and Hay Street at noon so we can start spending the day together. I forgot to tell you on Thursday, and I'd hate for you to get lost.
Yes, Pinky. I was asleep. Sunset finally got to answer.
Oopsies! I'm sorry I woke you up, but it's time to rise and shine anyways. Good morning, good morning. It's such a lovely day. Good morning, good morning.
Sunset slammed the phone shut, restraining herself not to throw it against the wall. It was decided. She hated Pinkie Pie the most. With a loud groan, she stood up and looked at herself in the mirror, noting her horrible bedhead and bags under her eyes. I should probably get ready before I'm dragged down there looking like this. She gathered her clothes for the day and made her way down to the bathroom. The water felt exceptionally cold that morning. After getting dressed and applying a little makeup, Sunset moved to the kitchen and shoved a Hot Pocket into the microwave. Just as it dinged, Sunset felt a jolt run through her spine, and her legs began moving on their own accord. No, wait a minute. I'm going to go. Just give me a sec. She reached for her phone and checked the time. It was exactly noon. Sunset gripped onto the doorframe, trying to drag herself back into the kitchen to at least fetch her lunch. But the rest of her body wouldn't have it. With a few loud swears, Sunset gave up and marched out her front door, slamming it with extra vice. This is officially cruel and unusual punishment.
You're late.
Sunset glared at Rainbow Dash as she approached the 5 girls sitting at a small cafe on 3rd Street. They all gave her a welcoming smile, save for Rainbow, who simply pointed an accusatory finger.
Well, forgive me, Your Highness. I wasn't informed of the time until last minute. Don't give me any of that,
Rainbow snipped.
Pinky told us that she had spent an hour trying to call you.
Pinky bobbed her head.
Yeah, but I guess I must have killed your battery, because the connection died while I was talking.
Yeah, battery died. That was it. Sunset made sure not to make eye contact. Anyways, let's just hurry up and get this over with. Rainbow huffed.
No need to sound so enthusiastic. Feel free to leave anytime you want.
Trust me, I would if I could.
Fluttershy put a hand on Rainbow's shoulder.
Be nice, both of you. We're here to have fun, remember?
Sunset looked down to the street where a plethora of booths and tables had been set up. Small carnival games were dispersed between the trinket stands, and Sunset could even see a petting zoo way down at the end of the block. None of it looked really appealing. Yeah, I'm not sure if any of this can constitute as fun, Sunset said with a deep line of skepticism. She felt an arm wrap around her neck as Pinky hooked her into a close embrace.
Oh, don't be such a party pooper, Sunset. There are all kinds of fun that can be had at a street fair.
Pinky, you're violating rule number 1, Sunset said testily. Pinky removed her arm, but the smile didn't leave her face.
I really want to see the magic show later.
Fluttershy pointed at the end of the street.
I'd really love to go see the petting zoo, if it isn't too much trouble, that is.
Me and R.D. put on a wager, Applejack said. The one with fewer prizes from the games has to come to school wearing the frilliest dress Rarity can make. Rarity looked up from the smoothie she had been drinking.
Why haven't I been informed of this? We're telling you now, aren't we?
Rainbow grinned. Rarity stood up from the table and discarded her cup into the trash can.
Very well, I'll do it, but only because it would be absolutely worth it to see Applejack in frills.
Hey, what makes you think I'm gonna lose?
Nothing, but a girl can dream, can't she?
Sunset massaged her temples, swearing under her breath. Listen, are you just going to sit here and talk, or are you actually going to do something? Because if I wanted to do nothing, I would have stayed home. Rainbow's grin melted back into a scowl.
Why don't you just go home then?
Sunset tried to turn and leave, but found her boots stuck to the ground. She looked back at Rainbow and growled, I can't.
Why not?
Sunset waited for her vocal cords to act on their own. Her stomach constricted in fear, and she could feel her heart rate soar. Crap! They'll find out about the curse. I'm doomed! She didn't care if they had good intentions. If they found out they could make her do anything they wanted just by asking, her life would be over. It was bad enough with them involuntarily asking things of her. If they did it consciously... Only the words never came. There was no force in her throat like there usually was when she was asked a question. Sunset blinked slowly as the revelation dawned on her. I don't have to tell them about the curse. I can lie about that. I don't have to tell them squat. It seemed like the elements had been merciful in some small degree. Sunset would have danced right there and then if it weren't for the confused stares she was receiving. She still hadn't answered Rainbow Dash's question. Because I'm just so excited to be spending the day with all of you. Man, it feels good to lie again.
See? I told you girls she'd warm up to us.
Pinky cheered. Rainbow gave both Sunset and Pinky a look of hard disbelief before brushing them off and starting down the street. Sunset sneered behind her. Don't worry, Dash. The feeling's mutual. Not wanting to start a scene, the group departed from the cafe, deciding to explore all of the booths first before taking a break for the magic show, and then ending the day with the petting zoo. The booths they all stopped at had various baubles and knickknacks, none of which appealed to Sunset. Whenever the clerk would ask if she was interested in something, Sunset gave a curt, stinging reply of no. Something she probably would have done even without the curse. They spent over half an hour at a small jewelry stand, waiting for Rarity to make up her mind whether or not she wanted to buy something. She put on a pair of expensive-looking earrings, admiring herself in the mirror.
What do you think, Sunset? Does it make me look good?
Sunset leaned against the counter, the epitome of boredom on her face. Why Rarity was asking her opinion, she would never know.
I think it makes you look like a
Oh, is that a ruby necklace?
Rarity darted off to another table. Sunset breathed a sigh of relief. She would have hated it if Rarity had heard the end of that sentence. In the end, Rarity decided that she couldn't afford to buy any of the jewelry on display.
They all look nice, but I really should be saving my money for the holidays.
Well, there goes a half an hour I'll never get back.
Sunset grumbled to herself. She gave a side glance at Rarity, who continued walking like she hadn't heard anything. They stopped at all the game booths, watching Applejack and Rainbow Dash compete for the most prizes. Applejack won the water gun shootout, and Rainbow retaliated by crushing her in a free throw competition. The next booth was a classic knock the bottles down with a baseball type of game. Applejack and Rainbow took turns making perfect shots, until Rainbow finally misjudged her throw and left one bottle standing. After claiming her prize of a large stuffed teddy bear, Applejack picked up another baseball and held it out to Sunset.
Come on, girl. Why don't you stop being such a stick in the mud and have a little fun?
Sunset assumed that was supposed to be taken as a favor, since her hand reacted and took the ball. She shrugged, deciding one game wouldn't kill her. After tossing it up and down a few times to get a feel for it, Sunset took aim at the stacked silver milk bottles, her face a mask of concentration. If she was going to do this, she was going to do it right. She brought her arm back, then hurled the ball with all her strength, watching it tear through the air, straight past the bottles and through the back of the booth's tenting. Rainbow burst into uncontrollable laughter, doubling over in tears.
Oh my God! That was terrible!
Well, Applejack rubbed the back of her neck. That was, unexpected. Sunset stared, open-mouthed at the hole she had made. How on earth had she missed a throw like that? She felt her eye begin to twitch as Rainbow fell over onto the ground, still laughing at Sunset's failure. The operator of the stand looked from Sunset to the hole and back.
Would you like to try again?
Glaring daggers, Sunset said in clipped tones.
Yes, I'd like to try again.
He placed another ball on the counter and took a few steps to the side. Sunset grabbed the ball and took aim once more, trying to drown out Rainbow's snickering. She had half a mind to aim for her head, but knew she probably wouldn't get any friendship points from that. She let the ball fly from her hand, watching it sail once more, this time on a straight course for the bottles. There was a clink and a crash as they fell to the floor, and Sunset whirled around and jabbed a finger at Rainbow.
Ha! In your face!
Still smiling, Rainbow got back to her feet.
Oh yeah, you sure showed me. Way to finally knock those over.
Sunset wanted to make a scathing retort, but was interrupted by the man behind the counter.
Ma'am, here's your prize.
He held out a small, pink unicorn doll.
How ironic,
Sunset thought, taking the plushie in her hands.
Aww,
Pinky materialized by Sunset's shoulder.
it's so cute. What are you gonna name it?
Nothing. Why would I name an inanimate object?
Because it's fun, silly.
Sunset rolled her eyes and shoved the toy into Pinky's hands. Then you keep it. I'm sure you two will be very happy together. Pinky shook her head and pushed it back.
I can't take it from you. It's your prize. Besides, I'm sure she'll be much happier with you. You two have so much in common.
She? Sunset looked back down at the unicorn. It did seem to possess more feminine qualities. Of course, in this world, all unicorns are generalized as feminine creatures.
fine. I'll keep you.
A sinister smile crept onto Sunset's face.
I'll call you Twilight Sparkle, and when we get home, I'll show you your new castle. The top of my stove.
See? I knew you two would get along.
Pinky beamed.
Come see the supreme and mystical Artemis Lulamoon.
Rainbow read off the sign in front of the impromptu stage that had been set up.
Lulamoon. Lulamoon. Wait, isn't that Trixie's last name?
Rarity nodded.
Must be related. Her father, I'd wager. Pinky, you really want to see this?
Pinky nodded and said,
Uh-huh, I hear he's really good. Not like Trixie, who was okay good, but actually good. He was an opening act in Las Vegas. Well, we already agreed to see it. Might as well just take our seats.
Rainbow sighed. For once, Sunset agreed with her. This was sure to be another colossal waste of their time. Trixie was dismal at best. There was no way her father could be any better if he was the one teaching her. They took their seats near the front row, Pinky bouncing up and down in her chair with excitement. Looking around, Sunset saw a pretty large crowd had gathered. Poor saps. At least no one had to pay for this. There was a large plume of purple smoke that covered the stage, and from it, a man appeared. He was tall, with silver hair and a well-trimmed goatee, and was wearing a very expensive-looking blue suit with white shoes and a purple cape. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls," he started in the typical showman-type voice. "Welcome to today's performance of the supreme and mystical Artemis Lulamoon." The stage erupted with lights and sparklers, and the crowd began to clap and cheer. "That wasn't magic, folks. That was just pyrotechnics." Artemis grinned. A wave of laughter rippled through the crowd. Sunset just blew a stray piece of hair out of her face. "Ah, I can already tell you'll be a lovely audience." He reached into his sleeve and produced a large bouquet of flowers, tossing it into the crowd. Just as some of the older girls in the crowd reached for it, the flowers burst into a stream of bubbles and were blown away by the wind. While the girls looked disappointed, the rest of the crowd clapped in amazement. It's just smoke and mirrors," Sunset muttered, only to be shushed by Rainbow. "All right, time for some real magic," Artemis announced, pulling out a wand from his other sleeve. "Now, with my magic words, I'm going to make..." He scanned the crowd until his eyes landed on Pinkie Pie. "That young girl right there, levitate up onto the stage." Pinkie gasped, breaking into a smile that, Sunset believed, shouldn't have been able to fit on her face. Artemis waved his wand. 1, 2, 3, Lulamoon! Pinkie's entire chair instantly began to rise off the ground and float towards the main stage. Everyone began to murmur in excitement. Even Sunset had to admit that she was struck with wonder. Magic like that couldn't be possible in this world. Pinkie landed on the stage and clapped her hands.
That was so amazing!
"Glad you enjoyed it, kid, but I'm not done yet. For my next act, I'll pull a rabbit from your hair." He reached into the nest that was Pinkie Pie's mane, rummaging around for a few seconds before frowning. "Well, this is a twist." He withdrew his arm, bringing with him not a white rabbit, but a small green reptile. "Is this a baby crocodile?"
Nope.
Pinkie smiled, taking the scaly creature from Artemis.
This is my pet alligator, Gummy. Don't worry, he doesn't have any teeth. See?
Pinkie pulled back his mouth, revealing only pink gums. Artemis scratched his head. "Well now, that's some magic all on its own." He smiled as the crowd chuckled at his and Pinkie's antics. "Regardless, Lulamoon!" The chair levitated again, returning back to its original spot between Sunset and Rainbow. Sunset stared at Pinkie and Gummy, her mouth set in a thin line. "Why do you have a baby alligator in your hair?"
Because fish are too mainstream.
"Now," Artemis continued, "could I please have a willing volunteer come and assist me on stage?" Sunset felt her hand shoot up, and she said,
I'll do it.
"What the heck? That wasn't aimed at me. And he said willing volunteer." The damage was done, however, as Artemis pointed her out and beckoned her onto the stage.
All right, Sunset, woohoo!
Pinkie cheered. "I'm surprised she volunteered in the first place," Rainbow whispered to Rarity, who nodded in return. Sunset stomped onto the stage, an angry scowl on her face. "All right, what do you want me to do?" "Well, first off, smile more. It would be a shame if your pretty face got stuck like that," Artemis joked. "Not gonna happen.
Boy, you're just a ball of sunshine, aren't you? At that moment, a spear of light appeared over Sunset's head, and the crowd broke into more laughter. At least tell us your name. Sunset Shimmer. Well, Sonny, for my next trick, I'm going to saw you in half. Sunset's half-lidded stare quickly changed into an expression of horror. What? Oh, come on, it'll be fun. He pointed his wand to the curtain behind him, which opened up to reveal a long, horizontal box. You slip in, I cut you in half, and separate them for the audience to see. Then, I'll go out for a milkshake, and come back in time to put you back together. Not funny, Sunset growled. Artemis tapped her on the nose. Then you, my friend, need a better sense of humor. He stood up straight. Besides, you already volunteered, so into the box you go. Begrudgingly, Sunset walked over to the box and climbed inside. Artemis closed both sections, leaving only her head and feet exposed. He produced a saw from what looked like thin air and held it over the middle of the box. If I die here, my most notable accomplishment would have been almost taking over Equestria. That's a sad thought. Sunset heard this type of trick was performed all the time, but she always thought the people who volunteered knew beforehand, and that there was really just some dummy in the second half of the box. Now that she was laying up there, Sunset realized she was seriously dealing with the idea that she was about to be cut in half. Now, children, I ask you do not try this at home. Are you ready, Sunset? No, and I think you're out of your mind. Artemis shrugged. I've been told worse. Lulamoon! With that, he brought the saw down, cutting into the indent that marked the separation of the two halves of the box. Sunset closed her eyes, waiting for the teeth of the blade to begin cutting into her. I hope you're happy, Elements. I'm going to die, and it's completely your fault! After a few minutes, Sunset opened an eye, wondering why she wasn't feeling excruciating pain yet. Artemis was staring down at her with a bemused expression. I was wondering how long you'd stay like that. He put one hand on each side of the box and shouted, Lulamoon! With a push, he separated the two halves, leaving Sunset with the oddest tingling sensation she had ever felt. What the heck? She wriggled her foot and could see it moving from the other box. This is freaky. The audience erupted into applause, and Artemis began to bow theatrically. Thank you, 'Twas an easy feat. Hey, do you mind sticking me back together now? Artemis chuckled. But of course, if you say the magic words. Sunset rolled her eyes and grumbled something. Sorry, couldn't quite hear you, dear. Lulamoon, Sunset had said just loud enough to be heard. She heard the boxes snap back together, and the tingling sensation around her middle vanished. She got out of the box and felt around her stomach for any scars. I don't get it, she said in amazement. How did you do that? Silly Sonny, a magician never reveals his secrets. Sunset crossed her arms. That's just something amateurs say when the answer is really obvious but well hidden. Amateur, you say? Artemis clapped his hands and quickly enveloped in purple smoke. When it dissipated, in his place was a rabbit chewing on a carrot. I just turned myself into a rabbit. The rabbit's mouth moved in perfect sync with the words Sunset heard, but she refused to believe it was actually the rabbit saying them. Can you turn into a rabbit? I don't think so. No, but I could turn into a demon and eat you in one bite. There was a pause. Then the rabbit burst into laughter. It looked up at her and said, I like you, kid. You got jokes. There was another puff of smoke, and the human Artemis returned with a bow. Please, give my lovely assistant a hand. He gestured to Sunset, his own hands having popped from his sleeves and began clapping on their own. The audience gave a loud round of applause, though none of them outdid Pinky with her wild cheers. Sunset felt heat rising in her cheeks and tried to hide her blushing with more scowling. Artemis patted her head and spoke into her ear. You know, you should really try smiling more often. I've found you get a lot further in life when you smile. Sunset snorted. At least he didn't say please. Thanks for the advice. I'll keep it in mind. Good. Well, ladies and gents, that's all for today. Come back tomorrow and see more mind-boggling tricks. With that, I bid you adieu. In one last cloud of smoke, Artemis vanished, leaving behind a firecracker that shot into the air and exploded in a shower of light. As soon as Sunset stepped off the stage, Pinkie rushed over to her.
Wow, Sunset, that was really cool! You make a really good assistant! How did it feel to be sawed in half?
Weird. Sunset subconsciously rubbed her stomach.
I hate to admit it, but that was pretty impressive for show magic.
After the show, the girls stopped to get something to eat. Try as she might, Sunset couldn't find a stand that didn't sell something that was deep-fried or greasy. In the end, she just settled for a hot dog. Sitting at a small table, Sunset listened to Rarity talk about this year's fall fashion, while Rainbow and Applejack counted up who had the most prizes. Rainbow had won by a single spider ring. Applejack groaned and put her face on the table. Hate frills. Rarity patted her on the shoulder.
Don't worry, dear. I'm going to make you a dress so dazzling, all the boys will be turning their heads when you walk down the hall.
Terrific. Sunset smirked. She had to admit, she'd love to see that. They moved along, heading for their last destination, the petting zoo. Fluttershy was now chatting excitedly over all the cute animals that were on display, listing off facts that only Pinkie seemed to be generally interested in. The animal pen smelled of old hay and droppings, making Sunset wrinkle her nose. Despite the fact that she had once been a pony, Sunset had never had a huge fondness for animals. At least, not the mindless ones in this world. Fluttershy, however, had taken to them like a bee to honey. She ran over to the nearest sheep and began stroking its wool, cooing.
Oh, you're just the softest thing ever.
The sheep let out a happy "bah" in response. Sunset wandered around, careful not to step on anything that even remotely looked like animal pellets. While she avoided making contact with any of the animals, everyone else seemed to be enjoying themselves.
Hey, look, Sunset!
Pinkie pointed to a brown pony.
It's one of your cousins!
Ha ha, very funny. Sunset deadpanned. She felt something grip onto the back of her coat and begin to pull on it. She looked down to see a goat making a meal out of her leather jacket.
What the? Hey, let go! Get your own jacket!
Sunset started tugging, trying to get the goat to release, but it merely grunted and continued chewing.
Shoo! Shoo!
She swatted at it. Fluttershy looked up from the pig she was feeding.
Oh dear. Sunset, please be very careful with him.
Let go of my jacket, you stupid goat, or I swear I'll trip.
Sunset stumbled backward, falling into the hay that matted the floor while the goat she had been playing tug-o-war with just chewed on the black fabric hanging out of its mouth. Fluttershy rushed over and held out a hand to Sunset.
Oh my goodness, are you okay?
No, I am not okay.
Sunset smacked Fluttershy's hand away and stood up, showing off the large tear in her already ruined jacket.
That stupid goat just ate a part of my clothes. How the hell does it chew through leather?
Fluttershy took a few steps back.
Oh, well, I'm sure he's very sorry.
He's a mindless animal, and sorry is not going to fix this.
She gave Fluttershy's shoulder a sharp poke.
You just had to want to come to the petting zoo of all places. This is your fault.
Rainbow swooped in and shoved Sunset back down into the hay.
Back off, Shimmer! This isn't her fault. All you've done most of the day is complain. If you really don't want to be here, then why don't you just do us all a favor and leave?
Rainbow shouted.
Gladly.
With a familiar jolt running down her back, Sunset got up and stormed away from the weeping Fluttershy and fuming Rainbow Dash.
Sunset, wait!
Sunset clapped her hands over her ears, not wanting to hear whatever Pinkie had to say. She had finally been released from her favor. There was no way she was going back.
I knew this was a stupid idea.
Long Road to Friendship, Chapter 6. Sunset reflected on the beauty of the settling dusk from her spot on the wooden bridge in one of Canterlot's better-known parks. The bridge overlooked a babbling stream that rippled with the last reflections of sunlight. She always loved the time of the day that was her namesake. She put up her hands on the wooden railing and rested her head on top of them. Today had been quite the dismal failure. She had been doing pretty well up until the incident at the petting zoo. Why am I so hung up about this?
I should be glad to have them out of my hair.
She sighed, blowing a tuft of hair that hung in front of her face.
Of course. I just made it harder on myself to make friends with them. Yeah, that's a pretty big downside.
Sunset groaned, shoving her hands into her pockets, only to feel something soft smashed into one of them. She pulled out the pink unicorn that she had won at the fair and frowned.
Twilight Sparkle.
The unicorn just stared at her with its button eyes.
You know this is your fault, right? You get to go home and be a princess while I'm stuck here practically torturing myself. I'd drown you in a river if I wasn't dead set on setting you on fire.
The unicorn just stared at her.
I'm talking to a doll. Oh, I've reached a new low. Great.
She placed it on the railing next to her and continued to stare into the water, watching her distorted reflection.
Why is it that both worlds are so fixated on friendship? All I've tried to do is make it through life without having to rely on anyone else. Is that so wrong?
You also tried to usurp the throne by brainwashing students and killing a princess. Sunset slumped against the railing, holding her arms over the side.
Okay, I can kind of see how I might have taken things a little too far, but I had a good reason.
Sunset frowned. She did have a good reason, didn't she? She was sure she did. She just couldn't recall what it was.
Bill!
Sunset let out a small shriek of surprise before she whipped around.
Ah!
She screamed again. Twilight Sparkle stood in front of her, covering her mouth to suppress her giggle of amusement.
I'm sorry. I just always wanted to do that.
Sunset stared at her for a moment before her brain started to function again. She balled her fists and snarled.
What are you doing here?
I was just taking my dog Spike out on a quick walk. Say hello, Spike.
Looking down, Sunset saw a familiar dog sniffing her boot. Spike looked up at her and gave her a few happy barks, wagging his tail all the while. Sunset brought her hands up to massage her forehead.
They even have the same dog,
she groaned.
And they both just don't know when to leave me alone.
Twilight sighed, all the mirth gone from her face.
Listen, I know that you don't like me.
Gee, what gave you that idea?
Which is why I'm even more confused about why you saved me that night. If you don't like me, then why'd you do it?
Sunset slumped her shoulders and looked away, refusing to meet Twilight's determined stare.
What? You don't know why you saved me?
No, I don't. Sunset lied. Twilight crossed her arms.
Then that makes me think you don't hate me as much as you let on.
Sunset turned back to Twilight, a fire burning in her eyes.
No, Twilight, I hate you,
she said in a slow, even voice.
I hate you so much it hurts sometimes. Just the very thought of you makes my skin crawl. You're like a reoccurring nightmare that I just can't wake up from no matter how much I try.
Twilight took a few steps back, pain written in her eyes.
Why? What did I ever do to you?
The pressure on Sunset's throat returned.
It's not what you did. It's what the other Twilight Sparkle did.
Twilight stomped her foot, startling Spike into barking at the two girls raising their voices.
There you go again with that other Twilight Sparkle thing. What on earth are you talking about? There isn't another me.
Yes, there is. There's another you who lives in another world, and she ruined my life.
Twilight rolled her eyes.
You don't seriously expect me to believe that, do you?
No, actually, I don't.
Then why are you telling me this instead of the truth?
Because it is the truth!
Sunset looked down at Spike, who was still barking.
Shut up already!
Spike folded his ears and ran to hide behind Twilight's leg. Twilight scowled at Sunset and pointed with a finger.
First of all, don't yell at my dog. And second, are you crazy? You think there's another world with another me?
Sunset brushed Twilight's hand away.
No, I'm not crazy. And I don't think there's another world. I know there is one.
Sunset turned and walked halfway down the bridge before stopping.
I think I know how I can finally get rid of her.
She turned around.
Twilight, do you really want to know the truth? Because it's going to destroy every fundamental thing you believe in. I could destroy your view of the world right now. Do you really want that?
Twilight opened her mouth, then hesitated, biting her lip. She was silent for a moment,
eyes darting around the park as she thought.
What could you possibly know that could reshape my worldview?
She asked in a shaky voice. Sunset walked up to her and looked her straight in the eye. Magic exists, Twilight Sparkle. And not the Las Vegas smoke and mirrors kind, actual magic, with spells and potions and curses. And there is a parallel world out there that could easily harness magic and do things that you could only dream of. Twilight took a step back, her mouth opened in disbelief. She stared, mesmerized by Sunset's intense eyes.
You're lying.
Sunset could hear the doubt in her voice.
You have to be lying. Or crazy. Magic doesn't exist.
Sunset smirked. Yes, it does, Twilight. It's extremely weak here to the point of non-existence. But there is a world that is connected to this one where it's so powerful. They have cities made of clouds. Their ruler can move the sun, Twilight. Sunset took another step back, almost tripping over Spike.
That can't be.
Satisfied, Sunset turned to leave. That's what I thought. You don't want to hear the full truth, Twilight. You aren't ready for it. Go home, forget you ever met me, and forget what I said. You'll sleep better at night. Sunset stalked off the bridge, a content smile on her face. She didn't bother looking back at Twilight. She knew she would just find her with a hopelessly confused or scared expression. There. I don't think I'll have to worry about her for a very, very long time. Rarity sat with her friends in the cafe where they had started their day at. They had finally gotten Fluttershy to stop crying and were now trying to enjoy the mugs of hot cocoa they had ordered. Rarity stirred hers with a spoon, breaking up the swirl of whipped cream on top and blending it into the sweet black drink before taking a careful sip.
We were making such good progress, too. Well, maybe not good progress, but it was a start. If we had just gotten Sunset to actually enjoy herself, we might have broken through to her.
She was jerked out of her thoughts when Rainbow slammed her mug down against the table, having already drained it.
This is so stupid! Why are we wasting our time with her? She clearly doesn't want to be our friend, so why should we bother trying to be hers?
Pinky lipped a dollop of whipped cream off her own nose.
Because, Dashy, everybody needs a friend, especially Sunset. If we don't try to make friends with her, she might go back to being mean to everybody.
Pinky gasped.
Or even worse, she might turn into a demon again and start throwing fireballs everywhere.
Rainbow put an arm on the table and rested her head on her hand.
Yeah, I doubt that's gonna happen again. Regardless,
Rarity spoke up.
we made a promise to try and help her, and we should keep it. And while I'm not too keen on the idea of building a friendship off a promise, I suppose we have to start somewhere. You can't be serious, Rarity. She practically screamed at Fluttershy, and you still want to be friends with her?
Rarity held up a hand.
I'm not saying she shouldn't apologize, but we should also consider that she's spent practically the last 3 years alone, or bossing someone around. We can't expect her to change overnight.
Applejack nodded. Rarity's right. Maybe we should just try talking to her first. Get to know her a little more. We might be able to avoid situations like this if we start by doing things she likes. Rainbow let out a frustrated growl.
Ugh! Fluttershy, you're with me on this, right? You can't seriously still want to be friends with Sunset Shimmer, do you?
Fluttershy just stared at her cocoa.
Well, the goat did eat her jacket.
Rainbow threw up her arms.
What's wrong with you guys? Listen, I get you want to keep your promise to Twilight, but this is a lost cause. Sunset isn't going to change.
Now that ain't fair, R.D. You can't just judge her off today.
I'm not. I'm judging her off everything she's done since freshman year.
Applejack gave her a stern look. Now listen here, Dash. She apologized for that. More or less, that's in the past now. We've got to move on and help her be a better person. Rainbow dropped her head against the table.
You guys are hopeless.
She raised it again, glaring at all of them.
Fine. I'll let it go this time. But I swear, if she crosses one more line...
Rainbow brought a fist into her open palm.
I'm going to give her an early graduation present.
Twilight's alarm went off at the time it always did, and she pressed the snooze button hoping she could get a few more minutes of sleep. Something wet began to tickle her face, and she started to giggle.
Spike, stop it! Spike! Okay, I'm up.
She rose from her bed, taking Spike into her arms and scratching him behind the ear.
First day at my new school, buddy.
Twilight said with a hint of longing in her voice. She looked up at her room, everything nice and organized in very specific fashions. Twilight had tried her hardest to replicate her old room as much as she could. Twilight sighed. She really hadn't wanted to move, but her father's promotion at work had required her entire family to have to move for the sake of convenience. She had been happy for her dad. He had really wanted the job. But Twilight had been forced to transfer out of her old private school. Her parents had thought it was probably for the best. Twilight didn't have that many friends. Maybe she could make more at a public school. Putting Spike down on the floor, Twilight got up and proceeded to get dressed, washing herself off in the bathroom and combing out the knots in her hair. She put on her nicest blouse and a long purple skirt, wanting to make a good first impression. Looking herself over in the mirror, she said,
Mom is right. I should try and make a few new friends this year.
She frowned. But what if everyone avoided her, or was intimidated by her extensive knowledge of, well, pretty much everything? That was what happened last time. For the last 3 years, she had only had one friend, though they had been like 2 peas in a pod.
Well,
Twilight gave herself a determined look.
I'll make some new friends. That's what she'd want me to do.
But first, she'd get some answers from Sunset Shimmer. Twilight grabbed her backpack, rubbing Spike on the head one last time before she headed downstairs. She had spent all of Sunday contemplating what Sunset had said to her, that there was another world, filled with magic, and it had something to do with another her. When Twilight had looked into Sunset's eyes, she had searched for any sign that Sunset was lying, a nervous twitch or something. When she couldn't find any, Twilight looked for a sign of mental instability. But Sunset had seemed so sure of what she was saying. Twilight had gone through every medical book she owned to find something that she could use to justify any Sunset's mannerisms or speech patterns as that of a crazy person. When she found none, Twilight was left with 2 beliefs, that Sunset was the best liar in history, or she was telling the truth. Twilight was sure Sunset attended Canterlot High, the school she herself was now enrolled in. There, Twilight planned to confront her one last time to get the whole truth out of her. She didn't care if it turned her whole world view upside down. Twilight needed to know.
Once she tells me everything, I can start logically analyzing it and debunking it. She's only telling me what she thinks is true. I hope.
Breakfast was a lonely affair. Shining Armor was out on another early patrol, and her mother was probably still asleep after another late shift at the hospital. By the time her dad came down, she had already finished her cereal and apple.
Good morning, sweetheart,
Nightlight said, kissing Twilight on the forehead. He was dressed in a nice gray suit with a large brown overcoat, his new, standard look as an astronomy professor at Canterlot University.
Big day, huh?
Twilight shuffled in her seat.
Yeah, I guess so.
Nightlight grabbed his keys off the counter.
Well, come on then. Don't want to be late on your first day.
Twilight grabbed her backpack off the back of her chair and headed for the car, trying her best to look enthusiastic. The first few minutes of the car ride had been painfully silent. Twilight tried to keep herself occupied by staring out the window, looking at all the students walking to school. Nightlight let out a slow breath.
Nervous? He asked.
Twilight just nodded her head.
I'll be honest, I'm nervous too, especially after what happened last week.
Twilight gripped her hands tight. That had been the scariest night of her life. She had come home quite dazed from how fast everything had just spiraled out of control, and the sudden appearance of her savior, Sunset Shimmer. It had taken a few days, but Twilight finally broke down and told her family everything. She had never seen Shining so upset.
Don't worry, Dad. It's school. I'll be safe here.
Twilight gave him a reassuring smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. No matter how hard she tried to play it off, she was still shaken up.
I know. School is probably the safest place you could ever be other than home. I just can't help but worry.
Everything will be just fine. I promise.
Nightlight looked at her from the corner of his eye and smiled.
I know, you're a tough girl just like your mom. Just promise me you'll be careful, though.
I promise,
she repeated.
And try to make some friends this year. High school is more fun and safe if you have some good friends.
Twilight huffed.
It's not like I didn't have friends before, Dad.
Twilight, you had one friend.
Still counts.
The car slowed to a stop in front of Canterlot High, where students were milling around outside, amicably chatting with one another. Twilight could already feel a pleasant atmosphere radiating from the campus. She unbuckled herself and leaned over to kiss her dad on the cheek.
Have a good day at work.
And you have a good day at school. Nightlight kissed her back. I'll be here to pick you up as soon as school ends. Twilight nodded and hopped out of the car, waving as it pulled away. She turned and looked at the 2-story building in front of her. Flags and banners proudly bearing the school's emblem decorated the front, while a large marble statue depicting the school's mascot stood in the courtyard. She would have started attending Canterlot High last week, but the school had taken the entire week off due to renovations. Twilight had questioned the school's structural integrity when she heard about this. If a school had to take an unscheduled recess for repairs, it couldn't be that well maintained. So she was pleasantly surprised when she entered the building and found everything gleaming like it was brand new.
Wow,
She marveled, constantly spinning around to take in everything. She bumped into something and staggered back, almost falling to the floor.
oops.
She looked up and saw she had crashed into what appeared to be one of the jocks.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I wasn't looking where I was going.
Hey, no worries, Twilight. He smiled and waved before walking off. Twilight stared after him.
How did he know my name?
As she started down one of the many halls, she found that a lot of people seemed to already know who she was. Hey, Twilight!
What's up, Twilight? Twi, you rock!
Twilight wanted to say she was flattered, but in all honesty, she was just confused, and a little unnerved as well. She had never been here before, nor did she know anyone here. Yet they all seemed to know her and treated her like she was their best friend.
All right, now I definitely need to find Sunset Shimmer.
The best way to do that, she decided, was to ask someone if she even attended the school in the first place. Twilight would hate to keep searching, only to realize that Sunset went to a completely different school. She walked up to the first girl she saw, who had a massive nest of pink hair and cheerful disposition Twilight could feel from a yard away. Deciding she was approachable, Twilight tapped her on the shoulder.
Excuse me, do you know...
The girl whirled around and had blinked at her before she leaped into the air with a loud gasp and shot off down the hallway screaming, "Girls!" Twilight looked on in open-mouthed confusion.
Well, that was... interesting. Girls!
Pinky yelled as she tore down the hall, her feet barely touching the ground.
Girls, girls, girls!
Pinky wasn't sure if she should be happy or terrified that the other Twilight Sparkle just walked onto campus, but she didn't know that everyone else needed to know, and she had to tell them quick. She spotted Rarity having a conversation with some of the fashionistas and stuck out her arm.
So then I said to her, "Whoa, Pinky!
Pinky's arm had hooked around Rarity's and dragged her away from the conversation.
What are you doing? No time! We have a situation! I think, maybe, there's Applejack!"
Applejack was standing at her locker, trying to get comfortable in a white, frilly dress that Rarity had made when she noticed Pinky speeding towards her. "Hey, girls! What's... Oh!" Pinky had grabbed her by the hand and pulled her along.
Come on! I need to tell you something! This is big! Like, super big!
Rarity? What is she babbling about? Rarity could only shrug.
Quick!
Pinky pointed with her tongue, both her hands currently occupied.
Grab Fluttershy, Applejack!
Fluttershy had just walked into view from an adjoining hallway when Applejack grabbed her by the wrist and dragged her along for Pinky's ride. Fluttershy stumbled and was hauled across the tile floor for a moment before she found her legs and started to jog in order to keep up.
What's going on?
She asked in a panicked voice. Sorry, Sugar Cube. We have no idea, Applejack answered. Pinky led them out the back door to the stadium, where Rainbow was out on the soccer field bouncing a ball on her head.
97, 98, 99, Rainbow Dash!
Pinky yelled as she slammed into her, bringing all 5 girls to the grass. The soccer ball fell onto the lawn next to Rainbow, who groaned.
Aw, come on, Pinky! I was on a roll!
Pinky jumped to her feet.
I'm super sorry, but we have a problem. Or actually, it's more like a situation. Or maybe a predicament. Actually, it could be called a Pinky get to the point!
Rainbow snapped.
Twilight is here!
Pinky said, flailing her arms over her head.
What?
They all shouted simultaneously. Rarity paused from her chore of trying to wipe the grass stains off Applejack's dress.
You mean she came back? No! Not that Twilight! Our Twilight! Oh, wait. I mean, the one from this world. The non-magical one.
How do you know, Pinky? Applejack asked.
'Cause she just came up and talked to me in the hallway. Wow. What are the odds of this world's Twilight Sparkle coming to Canterlot High right after the other one leaves?
Fluttershy wondered. Pinky tapped a finger against her chin.
Pretty high, I guess.
She shook her head.
But don't you girls see the problem here?
Rainbow shrugged.
Not really.
Rarity took her by the shoulders and said in a dramatic voice,
Rainbow, think about it. This is high school and teenagers talk. What do you think is on everyone's mind right now?
Rainbow's eyes widened.
Oh, now I see what you mean.
Rarity nodded.
If word of what happened at the dance reaches that Twilight's ears, she's going to be hopelessly confused. She'll think everyone around here is crazy or trying to pull some cruel joke on her. Oh my, it'd be even worse if she ran into Flash Sentry or Sunset.
Fluttershy looked up with the same horrified expression that everyone else had. They all broke into a run, charging back into the school at top speed with Pinky in the lead again. Hold up, y'all, Applejack said in between breaths, trying not to trip in her dress. Maybe we're overthinking this. It's not like Sunset's gonna hurt the girl, right? Rainbow looked over and gave her a pointed stare. I was trying to be optimistic. As they rounded the corner, Pinky came sliding to a stop, the rest of the girls piling up behind her. Down the hall, in front of her, Pinky could see Twilight walking up to Sunset, who was storing her backpack into her locker.
No!
Pinky shouted as Twilight tapped Sunset on the shoulder. Sunset turned around and stared at Twilight, then screamed. Long Road to Friendship. Chapter 7. Sunset clapped a hand over her mouth to stop herself from screaming. She stared down at Twilight, taking some satisfaction that her scream had at least startled the girl back some ways. Sunset tried to take a few calming breaths, but she could still feel her heart beating erratically. She removed her hand and took an aggressive stance. What the hell are you doing here? She half shouted, half hissed.
I go here now,
Twilight said simply. Sunset's eye twitched, something she had noticed it had been doing a lot more often. Of course she would come here of all places. Oh, dear Celestia, what have I done to deserve all of this? And why are you choosing to bug me of all people? Sunset asked in a low growl.
Because
Twilight took a deep breath.
I want to know the truth.
The truth? Sunset asked incredulously. Now you want to know the truth? You can't handle the truth. Twilight looked back at her with a determined expression that Sunset instantly grew to hate.
That's for me to decide, isn't it? Everyone in the school seems to already know my name. One of them even called me Princess, and I want to know why.
Yes, I guess that first part is true, Sunset mumbled. She looked around at some of the students who were beginning to gather and stare at the two girls who looked like they were about to break into a fight. Pointing a finger at Twilight, Sunset said, Lunch, cafeteria, corner table. She looked over to Pinky and the four girls looking over her shoulder. You five, be there. With that, Sunset turned on her heel and stomped away, practically hissing at anyone standing in her path.
By the way,
Twilight called to her.
You know there's a tear in your jacket, right?
Yes, I'm very aware there's a tear in my jacket. The first day back to school was a horribly dull affair for Sunset. Class seemed to drag on forever, and it didn't help that she couldn't even hear the teacher, what with all her classmates whispering to each other about what they'd remembered from the dance, or what they did on their week off. Sunset was actually relieved when the lunch bell rang. She was eager to get this over with and finally say good riddance to Twilight Sparkle. Rarity fell into step next to her, a worried expression on her face.
Sunset, what exactly do you plan on telling Twilight?
The truth.
Oh, that's what I thought.
Rarity bit her lip.
Well, I think honesty is the best policy. Are you sure that's a good idea?
Sunset stopped in front of the cafeteria door. Do you have something better in mind?
No, not really.
Then shut up and follow along. Sunset threw the doors open and marched inside. Rarity put her hands on her hips.
Well, no need to be so rude.
Sunset grabbed a tray of cafeteria food, making a face of disgust. On a normal day, she would just persuade someone with a good-looking packed lunch to trade with her. Now, she was forced to eat. Looking at the bowl of green mush, Sunset wasn't sure if she wanted to know what it was. She sat down at the table in the farthest corner of the room, Rarity taking a seat next to her. Twilight quickly appeared and sat across from Sunset. Shortly after, Pinkie showed up, scooting in next to Sunset, while Rainbow, Applejack, and Fluttershy all crammed in next to Twilight.
So why exactly are they all here?
Twilight asked. Because they're kind of important. Unfortunately, Sunset added under her breath.
Hi!
Pinkie reached over the table and took Twilight's hand, shaking it vigorously.
I'm Pinkie Pie. It's so nice to see you again. Again?
Twilight looked at Sunset, who simply had a bored expression.
We'll explain in a second, dear.
Rarity smiled. She took Twilight's hand after Pinkie finally let go.
You can call me Rarity. Rainbow Dash.
Rainbow grinned. Applejack tipped her hat. Name's Applejack. And if you're wondering, no, I don't normally wear dresses to school.
I'm Fluttershy.
Fluttershy said with a surprisingly clear voice. Hooray, we're all friends here, Sunset said in a sarcastic tone. She drummed her fingers on the table. Now, where do I start?
The beginning, silly.
Pinkie offered. Sunset ignored her. All right. Do you remember what I told you about the other world on Saturday? Twilight nodded her head.
Wait, Saturday?
Rainbow cut in.
When did you meet with her?
Sometime after I left you guys at the fair. Now, don't interrupt me. Rainbow fell silent, only after giving Sunset a cold glare. Like I was saying, the other world filled with magic is called Equestria. Its most dominant species are the 3 most common types of pony.
Hold on.
Twilight laughed.
Are you seriously going to tell me there's a world full of sentient, magical horses?
Yes. And what did I just say about interrupting me? Twilight cleared her throat, suppressing another laugh.
Please continue.
Anyways, before I was rudely interrupted again, there are 3 main types of ponies in Equestria. Earth ponies, which are like the normal ponies here, only they live longer and have slightly higher IQ. Pegasi, and unicorns. Then there are alicorns, which are powerful creatures with all 3 traits. Princess Twilight Sparkle, your other in that world, was an alicorn. She had a crown that had incredible power inside of it. Sunset cast her gaze down to the unappetizing food in front of her. I wanted it, and all that power that came with it for myself. The statue out front serves as a gateway between our 2 worlds. Only it opens once every 30 moons for 3 days at a time. When it opened up last week, I snuck back and took the crown. Unfortunately, I wasn't as stealthy as I could have been. There was a scuffle, and the crown ended up in... She gave Fluttershy a dark look. Unfortunate hands. Fluttershy hid in her hair and ducked down in her seat. The crown was then going to be used as the prize for the Princess of the Fall Formal. I wasn't too worried about it then. I thought I was certain to win the title like I did every year. Sunset gripped the table and clenched her teeth. And then she followed me back here. She was so determined to get her stupid crown back. She just barges in here and ruins everything. Rainbow gave a cruel smirk.
You mean by helping the rest of us become friends again and uniting the entire school to stand up to you and making sure you finally lose?
Sunset slammed her hands on the table and stood up, Rainbow copying her movements, a challenge in her eye. Both girls stared each other down, while the rest of the cafeteria watched on in silence. Yes, Sunset said in a lethal whisper, by doing that. Rarity, very slowly, put a hand on Sunset's arm and pulled her back down to the bench, while Applejack did the same for Rainbow.
Please, let's try not to make a scene here, girls,
Rarity mediated. Sunset measured the ferocity in Rainbow's eyes. They gave a stern warning, daring Sunset to try something. Though it was tempting, Sunset wasn't in the mood to fight. She finally averted her glare back to the wall and continued her story. Well,
As Rainbow so nicely put it, the other Twilight Sparkle turned the whole school against me. She won the crown, but I wasn't going down without a fight.
This is the part where it gets really good.
Pinkie whispered, mostly to herself. After a few underhanded tricks, I finally snatched the crown for myself. When I finally put it on, I got all the power I wanted, but... Sunset stopped, unable to find the words to explain what happened next. She had turned into a monster, an experience that still confused and even frightened her. That had not been part of her plan. What she felt during her time as a demon, all the thoughts and emotions running through her at that moment. Sunset realized she wasn't ready to talk about it. She couldn't talk about it. Luckily for her, Pinkie interjected.
So basically, Sunset turned into this really scary monster with bat wings and sharp claws, and then she broke into the school and brainwashed all of the students before saying, Twilight keeps getting in my way, and now I'm going to destroy her. So she makes this big fireball and throws it at her. But we were Princess Twilight's friends, because she helped all of us become friends again. Then Sunset divided us, and we weren't going to let Twilight stand by herself. So we all got into a big group hug, which activated some more super cool magic. And we all floated into the sky and shot a super pretty rainbow beam at Sunset, and she turned back to normal. Then we all danced, and Twilight went home. The end.
Sunset pointed to Pinkie. That just about sums it up. Twilight put her hands together on the table and rested her chin on them.
So, let me see if I've got this straight. There's another Twilight Sparkle who is a magical pony princess in another world, and you stole her crown so you could have magic powers. But she chased you back into this world and brought the whole school together to vote for her instead of you for Princess of a Dance, only you took the crown away and turned into a monster. But the other Twilight and these girls stood up to you and fired some magical rainbow that turned you back?
Yep. Sunset nodded. Twilight was silent for a moment. Then she burst into hysterical laughter, clutching her sides.
That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Oh, you had me worried for a second. You looked so serious back on the bridge. I actually believed you. And the fact that you got them all to play along? Wow, you must be dedicated. Okay, I get it. Hey's a new girl. Even I have to admit, that was pretty good.
Twilight's laughter came to an end as she wiped the tears from her eyes. She looked around at the faces staring back at her. Only Pinkie was smiling, as usual. Twilight's own grin slid from her face.
Okay, I caught on. Why aren't you girls laughing with me?
Because, Sugar Cube, we ain't joking, Applejack said.
But you have to be joking.
Twilight gave a weak laugh.
You don't really think there's a world filled with ponies, and that she turned into a demon?
Twilight pointed at Sunset, who now wore an impassive face. Applejack nodded. I do, because I was there when it all happened. I know it's hard to believe, but it's the truth.
No, it isn't,
Twilight said, starting to sound angry.
Listen to yourselves. You're spouting off things that only happen in science fiction novels or children's books. Interplanetary travel is still a decade away, at least. And you're telling me that there's a dimension that connects to this world? You're all crazy.
Rarity looked over at Pinkie.
Show her the picture.
Pinkie reached into her hair and produced a simple photograph, handing it to Twilight. Twilight took it, and her eyes grew to the size of dinner plates.
That's me. But how? And why do I have wings?
Magic, Sunset said.
Magic?
Twilight trailed off, then furrowed her eyebrows.
Or Photoshop?
Sunset couldn't help but smirk. She's really trying not to believe this. Pinkie, Sunset snapped her fingers. Show her the video.
Girl, don't you snap your fingers at me.
Pinkie said, rolling her neck. Sunset slammed her palm against the table, glaring at her.
Right, video, on it.
Pinkie ducked under the table and produced a very pink laptop from her bag. She pulled up the slender video that Sunset had made fun of Twilight and flipped the computer around.
Yeah, it's kinda bad.
Twilight leaned in and watched the video play. Sunset could hear her own narration, recalling fondly of her impressive video-making skills. She watched Twilight's frown grow deeper and deeper as the video continued, and she slammed the computer shut when it finished. So, Sunset smiled viciously. Where's your science fiction now? Twilight put her head in her hands.
There has to be an explanation for this. You guys are just pulling a really drawn-out prank, right?
She was almost pleading now. Sunset growled in frustration. No, we aren't. Look, Twilight, you wanted the truth. Here it is. She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. I told you couldn't handle it.
No, it's not that. I thought, I was hoping.
That I was wrong? Twilight picked up her lunch, looking very tired.
I need some time alone.
She walked off to the last unoccupied table, slumping in her chair.
Oh my, she looks pretty distraught.
Fluttershy said. Yeah. Sunset nodded. Her face instantly brightened up. Well, that was fun. Rainbow opened her mouth, no doubt to give Sunset a verbal lashing, but Applejack beat her to it. Sunset, why do you hate her so much? I don't hate her. I don't? I hate the other Twilight Sparkle. Okay, that makes sense. I just mildly dislike her because they share the same face. Rarity poked at her salad.
Well, I think it's safe to say we may have scarred her for life.
They all looked back at Twilight, just in time to see Flash Sentry approach her. Oh, this should be good, Sunset thought. Flash looked more confused the longer he talked to Twilight. Eventually, she just shook her head and proceeded to eat her lunch, trying to ignore the world around her. Flash looked dejected for a moment before he turned and walked toward Sunset's table. All right, can someone please explain to me what's going on? It had been a general question, but his eyes were locked on Sunset. Why is Twilight acting like she doesn't remember? Well, anything. It's simple. Sunset smiled, throwing extra venom into her words. It's not the Twilight Sparkle that you fell in love with. Flash's face turned red. Well, I don't know if... Wait, do you mean that this isn't the same Twilight Sparkle? She looks just the same. I mean your little girlfriend came from another world, and now she's gone, and you'll probably never see her again. That one is the version of Twilight Sparkle that actually lives here. I'd tell you more, but you already missed story time, and I don't feel like repeating myself. Flash stared at her before turning to the other girls. Can one of you help me out here? Applejack shrugged. Sorry, Flash, but it's pretty much like Sunset said. That Twilight Sparkle and the Twilight Sparkle from last week are two different Twilight Sparkles. All right. Flash sighed and rubbed his head. The only reason I'm going to believe that is because what I saw at the dance still defies explanation. So I guess weirder things have happened. He shoved his hands into his pockets and walked away, still looking put out, leaving Sunset in an even better mood than before. I just destroyed someone's entire belief in science and indirectly broke my ex-boyfriend's heart. Today was a good day. Twilight climbed the top of the stairs and entered her room, exhausted from the long day. It had been a chore lying to her parents about the interesting day she had and meeting all the colorful people at lunch.
Who delivered life-altering news?
She collapsed onto her bed, shutting her eyes and even ignoring the loving dog kisses Spike tried to give her. She wasn't sure it bugged her more, the fact that magic existed, or the fact that she was a pony princess in another world who stood up to a demon. She reached for a pillow and let out a muffled yell.
What am I getting so worked up about? So what if there's another me who has magical powers and is a pony? It doesn't matter. It's not like we'll ever meet or anything. This doesn't change anything at all. Just because magic exists doesn't disprove science. It just bends a few rules. So there are other dimensions. That just proves the multiverse theory. See, Twilight? Nothing to get worked up about.
Twilight lifted her head and finally acknowledged Spike, petting him on the head. His presence seemed to always calm her down when she went into one of her moods. She flipped onto her back, letting Spike curl up on her stomach.
Okay, so the alternate reality thing does explain some stuff. Like how everyone at school already knows my name. And if the whole story is true, then that explains why the schools closed down last week.
Oddly enough, Twilight was starting to find it easier to believe that her otherworld counterpart was a pony. What she couldn't believe was,
Sunset Shimmer? Was a monster?
sure, she seemed hard on the outside, cold, mean, and maybe a little spiteful, but a monster? An actual winged beast of some sort? Twilight shook her head. She thought back to the alley and how Sunset had stood up to those two men, how she had easily dispatched them with a rough, yet seemingly eloquent fighting style. Would a monster do that? Yes, Sunset gave off the impression that she hated Twilight, but there had to be more to it than that. Sunset Shimmer had saved Twilight's life, and Twilight just couldn't let it go. Long Road to Friendship, Chapter 8. Sunset opened her locker and looked at the small list that had been taped to the inside of the door. She pulled a pen out of her backpack and read through it. Get rid of Twilight Sparkle? Check. Revenge on Flash Sentry? She shrugged. She had done that more or less. Check. Make friends with the 5 most annoying girls in school? Sunset grimaced, stuffing her pen away. That one was still going to take some work. While the majority of them seemed to have forgiven her for the incident at the petting zoo, there was still the unwillingness to want to be friends on her end. Sunset knew she had to make friends if she wanted her life to become somewhat normal again, but it was a hard feat when she still resented everyone. There was another problem now. 3 days ago, Sunset had told Twilight about the other world and her pony princess twin. And while that seemed to have rattled Twilight enough to give Sunset some distance, though she seemed to persist in smiling and waving at her in the hallways, the Canterlot High Five, as Pinky insisted they be called, were only too eager to be friends with Twilight. Since then, Sunset had kept her distance from all 6 of them. While she was still willing to force herself to be friends with those 5, being friends with the mirror image of the girl who had ruined her life was, well, Sunset wasn't sure what it was. She grabbed the textbook she had originally come to get and shoved it into her backpack before slamming the locker shut. It wasn't fair. She desperately wanted to hate Twilight with all of her heart. And she did. Just not this Twilight. This Twilight hadn't done anything to her, other than bug her for the truth. It was a conflict that set guilt upon Sunset's heart. Guilt was a feeling Sunset was starting to experience more of lately. Something that really annoyed her. She had begun to feel genuinely guilty about what she had done to the school and the students, and guilty about hating them when most of them had done nothing to her. So now, it was guilt that Sunset felt when she thought about Twilight Sparkle and any of the nasty things she could potentially do to ruin her life. It wasn't fair to take revenge against someone who had 1 week ago been completely ignorant of everything. It wasn't fair to hate her for something she didn't do. That concept, however, only made Sunset hate Twilight for not being able to properly hate her. Although, it was more of a hollow hatred, and was always trailed by guilt. It was an annoying, vicious, and exhausting cycle. For Sunset, there was only one person in the school she could hate without feeling guilty about it. Rainbow Dash. She had made no effort to hide her disdain for Twilight, and the feeling was mutual. Sunset enjoyed it, though. While the rest of the school had simply taken to ignoring her, Rainbow hated her, allowing Sunset to freely reciprocate it, guilt-free. As she walked down the hall, the boots squeaking against the polished floors, Sunset thought, why can't life just be that simple? Everyone hates me, I hate them, and we all just go about our day. Instead, she was being forced to stop hating and make friends, completely ruining an otherwise perfect system. Until the curse is lifted, then I can go right back to hating everyone. Sunset stopped walking. Something about that seemed rather sad. Before she could put too much thought into it, the bell for the next class rang, sending students into the usual rampaging frenzy to get there on time. Sunset rode the human current and fought her way out of the tide when her classroom came up. Rarity had already made it in, and had seated herself near the front. She gestured for Sunset to take the seat next to her. Sunset rolled her eyes, but complied nonetheless.
Hello, Sunset. How are you today?
Rarity asked with genuine sweetness. All right, I guess, Sunset replied in a languid manner. Rarity had made it a habit to always ask how Sunset was doing, though Sunset hardly varied in her answers. Besides, if she did have anything to share, she doubted she would share it with Rarity. Then again, she supposed that was something friends did with each other, sharing feelings and stupid things like that.
Are you doing anything after school today?
Sunset dropped her head into her hand. Yeah, detention. Again. Rarity snapped her fingers.
Drat! I forgot about your, punishments. How long do you have to serve detention for?
A month, Sunset said sourly.
Well,
Rarity twirled a finger through her purple curls.
I suppose that's better than the alternative of getting suspended or expelled. Miss Celestia was pretty forgiving, don't you think?
Yeah, she was. I'm just glad she didn't ask for a parent-teacher conference or anything like that. The last of the students filed in as the bell rang a second time, signaling the start of class. Sunset pulled out her textbook and began to mindlessly take notes, while Mr. Noteworthy lectured on about some obscure moment in history. History was the only class Sunset actually had to work for to perfect her grade. She could never bother to remember all the dates, and who killed who for what reason, starting this particular war. Humans seem to enjoy killing themselves. That was the main thing she had taken away from 3 years of human history. Monster attacks aside, Sunset hadn't realized just how much of a radiant paradise Equestria was until she had come here. Of course, there had been wars, but never to the extent the humans had taken things. Thinking of Equestria sent a small pang of homesickness through Sunset's heart. The last time she had gone home, it was only to commit an act of petty theft. It had been so long since she had seen the rolling fields of the Unicorn Range, or the pristine, shining buildings of Canterlot. So long since she had seen her mother, or father, or Celestia. Her writing slowed to a crawl as her mind wandered off. She knew time flowed differently between the two worlds, and wondered if anyone would still remember her. Would her parents recognize her? Were they still around? Would Celestia have forgiven her by now? They hadn't parted on the best of terms, and while Sunset was still upset with her, part of her yearned to see Celestia's sweet, forgiving face.
Sunset!
Sunset jerked her head up from her notes and looked at Rarity, who had hissed her name. She was pointing forward to a scowling Mr. Noteworthy. Miss Shimmer, I asked you a question. Are you even paying attention to the lecture? No, not really. Sunset cringed. It was times like these she desperately missed lying. However, the rest of the class seemed to have gotten a laugh out of her snide remark. Mr. Noteworthy's scowl deepened, and he said, Well then, I guess I'll just have to talk to the principal about adding on another day of detention for you. Perhaps then the lesson will sink in. Ignoring the sniggering going on behind her, Sunset sank into her chair. Great. Lunch had started as a tepid affair, with Sunset poking at her meal alone and in peace. She looked over to the table where the Canterlot 5 were sitting, along with Twilight. Digging into her salad, Sunset couldn't help but notice Twilight's happy expression seemed almost forced. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, which occasionally wandered around the cafeteria in a frantic, searching manner. Sunset looked down at her food, smirking to herself. What's the matter, Sparkle? Trouble in friendship paradise? Underneath her feeling of glee, Sunset couldn't help but wonder what Twilight was looking so nervous about. She lifted her eyes back to the opposing table. Come to think of it, Twilight often wore that expression whenever she was around any of those girls. Wait a minute. Sunset counted the heads at the table. Someone was missing. Where did Pinky...
Hiya, Sunset! Ugh!
Sunset nearly fell out of her chair at the sudden manifestation of Pinkie Pie. Pinky! Sunset fumed. Don't do that! You nearly gave me a heart attack! Pinky dropped into the chair next to her and gave an apologetic smile.
I'm sorry. I just saw you sitting here all alone. I thought you might want some company. I didn't mean to scare you.
She rubbed her hands together in a sinister manner.
Then again, it is almost Halloween, which means it's almost time for me to start scaring everyone.
Sunset watched with dispassion as Pinky cackled like a cheesy villain, throwing her hands in the air. You'll have problems. Pinky stopped laughing and shrugged.
My mom always says I eat too much candy.
She reached into her hair and pulled out a lollipop.
But I can stop anytime I want to.
Uh-huh. Is there a particular reason you came to bug me, or are you just shooting to be extra annoying today? Pinky stuck the sucker into her mouth and frowned.
Boy, someone must have woken up with a lemon in her mouth because you are sour. I just wanted to see why you were alone.
Sunset went back to eating her salad. I happen to enjoy eating alone.
Why?
Pinky asked innocently. Because I dislike spending time with other people.
Why?
Because I don't like other people.
Why?
Because people are annoying. And if you say why one more time, I will rip your tongue out and feed it to you. Pinky blinked, still slurping on her lollipop.
Has anyone told you you have anger issues?
Sunset took a calming breath. It's been brought up before. Pinky leaned in and wrapped an arm around her shoulder.
Oh, that's okay. I used to be sad a lot when I was younger, but then I met friends who taught me to always see the bright side of things. You just need to stop being such a sourpuss McGrumpy Pants and make friends. And smile more. Definitely smile more.
You're the second person to tell me that. Sunset looked at Pinky's arm, then gave her a warning glance. And do you not remember rule number 1?
Don't talk about Fight Club?
Sunset was caught between the urge to slam her face against the table or choke Pinky until she was blue. You are absolutely hopeless.
Hey, you're the second person to tell me that. Weird, huh?
Pinky took the stem of the devoured lollipop and twisted it into a pretzel shape before sticking it between 2 fingers. She took aim, sticking her tongue out the side of her mouth, and flicked the pretzel across the room, where it bumped into the back of Rainbow's head. Rainbow turned around and glared at both Pinky and Sunset. Sunset locked eyes with her for a moment, before turning to see Pinky pointing back at her, while looking the other way, whistling innocently.
That's strike 2!
Rainbow called. Strike 2? Sunset held up her hands in confusion. What was strike 1?
Probably yelling at Fluttershy.
Right, Sunset said, clicking her tongue. The bell-ending lunch rang, sending everyone flocking out of the cafeteria into their next class. Sunset followed the procession, discarding her tray and half-eaten lunch before pushing into the throng of outgoing students.
Hey, Sunset! Wait!
Pinky caught up to her, nimbly weaving through the crowd.
You should come to Sugar Cube Corner with us after school.
I can't. I have detention.
Oh, bummer. What about tomorrow?
Sunset looked back at her. Pinky, I have detention for the rest of the month, and then some.
Jeez Louise. Well, in that case, we'll just have to have a detention party sometime.
Pinky cheered.
Nothing cheers a detention like spending it with some good friends.
She turned off into another hallway, waving fervently.
Bye, Sunset! Have fun in detention!
Sunset kept walking, pushed by the ever-moving crowd. A party detention? She couldn't help but smirk. As annoying as Pinky was, Sunset had to admit she wouldn't mind seeing that happen. The rest of the day went by without incident, and while the last bell marked the end of the school session and freedom for most, for Sunset it signaled the start of another 2 hours of mind-numbing tasks. Today, she had been assigned to mop all the hallways around school, something that made her question the purpose of having a janitor. She decided to get to work without making a fuss to Celestia. The faster she finished, the faster she could go home and do nothing. Well, nothing is better than this, she grumbled, dragging the wet mop across the floor. Though she supposed it was better than what Snips and Snails were doing, cleaning all of the dishes from lunch. She made quick work of the central hall before she trailed down the eastern corridor, savoring the sweet silence. Everyone had been so eager to go home, she bet the only people left were the schools and the fall sports teams. At least, that's what she assumed until a faint noise brushed against her ears. It was quiet and muffled, but Sunset could tell it belonged to a human, and it almost sounded like crying. Curious, she halted her mopping and followed the noise, leading her to the girls' bathroom. She paused at the door, weighing her options. Part of her wanted to just walk away and let whoever was in misery work out their own problems. On the other hand, someone was crying, and Sunset had to admit it would be great to make them feel worse, just for old time's sake. Grinning savagely, Sunset pushed the door open, stepping into the black and white checkered bathroom. Upon her entry, the crying quickly turned into suppressed whimpers and the occasional hiccup. Her grin faded when she looked down at the bottom of the stalls and saw a familiar pair of boots. Of all people, it just had to be her. Sunset leaned against one of the sinks and crossed her arms. All right, Twilight, come out of there, she said tersely. There was a gasp, followed by the sound of an unlocking bolt, before Twilight stuck her head out of the stall. Her face shrieked with tear marks.
How did you know it was me?
I saw your dorky boots. Why are you in here anyway? Doesn't your dad pick you up? Twilight fully emerged from her hiding place, wiping her eyes on the back of her hand.
He had to stay late at work today, so I have to walk home.
Sunset raised a brow. Why didn't you walk home with any of the girls? She must have found the root of the problem, because at the mention of the 5, Twilight bit her lip and avoided Sunset's eyes. A grin began to creep across Sunset's face. What? Have they driven you crazy already? It's okay. I can barely stand them either. Twilight broke into a fresh wave of tears, instantly wiping Sunset's smile away.
It's not that. They don't want to be my friend.
What? Shaking her head, Twilight cried.
The way they look at me, they think I'm her. They want to be friends with Princess Twilight Sparkle, not me. I'm just a stand-in for her because we have the same name and look alike. They don't want to be my friends.
Sunset slumped her shoulders, watching Twilight weep into her hands. It was pretty sad to be thought of as just a stand-in for someone else. And while Sunset loved the idea of kicking someone while they were down, something inside her told her that now wasn't the best of times. I'm going to regret this later. I just know it. Twilight, look at me. Twilight lifted her head, staring at Sunset with bloodshot eyes. Sunset made a face of disgust. She reached over and pulled some paper towels out of the dispenser. Okay, first of all, stop crying and clean your face up. You look pathetic. She handed the towels to Twilight, allowing her to wipe up her tears and clean her nose. Now, Sunset's voice softened. Listen to me when I tell you that those girls want to be your friend. They want to get to know you. Them replacing you for the other Twilight is all just in your head.
But
don't interrupt me, Sunset warned. It's in your head, Sparkle. And as much as I loathe to admit, those are probably the nicest and most sincere girls you're going to meet around here. The last thing they want to do is hurt you or pretend you're just a replacement for someone else. Twilight wiped her eyes again.
do you really mean it?
Sunset nodded. Yeah, I do. They barely knew Twilight for 3 days. You have the rest of the year to make an impression.
I guess you're right.
Twilight sniffled.
I just feel like whenever they look at me, they're looking for a princess.
Yeah, well, she ain't all they make her out to be. Sunset crossed her arms again. Besides, it was a one-time thing. Give it a few weeks and everyone will have moved on or thought it was some really crazy dream. The attention span of a teenager only lasts for so long. Twilight let out a weak chuckle.
You're right. Rarity and Pinky, and all of them, they all seem like really nice girls. I guess I was just overreacting. If I just be myself, then they'll just come to expect that from me.
If you want to simplify it to an after-school special, sure, Sunset said with a shrug. Tossing the napkins away, Twilight grabbed her backpack and slung it over her back.
Thanks for talking to me, Sunset. I actually feel better now.
Meh. Sunset turned away, waiting for Twilight to take her leave. When she continued to stand there, Sunset asked, What else do you want, a cookie and a pat on the head?
No, I was just...
A slight blush appeared on Twilight's cheeks.
I was just wondering if you wanted to walk home with me?
Sunset gave her a lidded stare. No. Besides, I have detention.
Oh.
Sunset couldn't believe how disappointed Twilight looked.
Well, I guess I'll see you tomorrow.
Twilight pulled the door open and walked down the hall. Wait a minute, Sunset thought. Stay here and mop for another hour and a half, or walk this dork home and enjoy the rest of my day. Sunset emerged from the bathroom shouting, Hey, Sparkle, wait up! She walked briskly, catching up to Twilight, who had her hand on the entrance door.
What is it?
I changed my mind. I'll walk home with you. Just this once. Twilight regarded her with suspicion.
But I thought you said you had detention.
Yeah, which is exactly why I'm doing this. Walking home with you beats mopping floors. And yet, is still a punishment in and of itself.
Won't you get in more trouble for ditching?
Probably. I'll cross that bridge when I get there. Twilight took a turn in crossing her arms.
I don't know how I feel about someone ditching detention.
Sunset groaned. Listen, dork. Do you want my company or not? Twilight pretended to mull it over a minute before smiling brightly at her.
Of course.
She pushed the door open, stepping into the fading light of day.
I just hope you don't get into too much trouble.
They'll give me another day of detention. Gives Pinky more time to plan her detention party.
Detention party?
With a shake of her head, Sunset said, that girl will make a party out of anything. They passed the marble statue, gleaming in the light of the sun. Sunset saw Twilight eyeing it. Don't even think about it. Portals close for another 2.5 years.
2.5 years? Seems a little specific.
Twilight mused. I'm pretty sure it's based on the lunar cycle of both worlds. Our moon and their moon have to align while in their fullest phase, something that only happens 2.5 years, I guess.
I see. You know, you seem to know a lot about that place. Where'd you get all this information from?
From living there half my life, Sunset said matter-of-factly. Twilight stopped walking, staring at Sunset with wide eyes.
You mean, you're from
Sunset stopped and looked back. Equestria?
Yes, you're from Equestria?
Yes.
You're a pony?
Technically, yeah. I didn't bring that up 3 days ago.
No, not really!
Twilight exasperated. Huh. I thought that would have at least been implied, Sunset said nonchalantly.
How could you leave something like that out? That's kind of important information!
Twilight shouted. Because it wasn't that important at the time. And why are you getting so worked up about this?
Well...
Twilight quickly went from angry to embarrassed.
No reason, I guess. I just feel like it's something important you should tell your friends.
Sunset rubbed her temples. What exactly makes you think we're friends?
Well, you saved my life, told me the truth about Pony Princess me instead of holding it over my head, and you just comforted me while I was feeling really down.
Twilight counted off on her fingers.
I'm pretty sure those are things that friends do for each other.
Twilight strode past Sunset, looking pleased with her response, while Sunset just stood there, gaping after her. That's not... You... Damn it! Sunset pulled at her hair. Quick, think of something to change her mind.
Oh, yeah.
Twilight turned around.
I never really said thanks for that, did I? Thank you for being honest with me.
She walked up to the confused-looking Sunset and hugged her tight.
And thanks for cheering me up. I knew you couldn't really be a monster.
Sunset stood there, stunned by Twilight's embrace, her mind jumping into overdrive. Why is she thanking me? Why is she hugging me? Is she crazy? Why in the world does she want to be friends with me? Out loud, she asked the foremost question on her mind. What are you talking about? Twilight took a step back, releasing Sunset from her hug.
Well, it's not that I don't believe the story you told me, but Pinky must have been exaggerating when she said you turned into a monster, right?
Sunset felt her stomach drop, put her hands in her pockets, and walked past Twilight. No, she wasn't, she said, her voice now hoarse. I really did turn into a monster.
But why?
Twilight ran to catch up with her.
Sure, you're a little mean, but you aren't evil.
The element of magic was never meant to be worn by someone unworthy, someone who just wanted to use it for power. It's an artifact that is only meant to unite the virtues of friendship and channel them into pure magic. When I put it on, it just channeled all the dark things that were in my heart and turned me into a reflection of them. Sunset reached up and wiped her face. She clenched her teeth and said sternly, And no, I'm not going to talk any more about it. The less said, the better. Twilight looked at her with sad eyes.
All right then. But I still don't think you're evil. Not anymore, at least.
There was a moment of silence between them before Sunset asked, "What were you doing out so late that night anyway?"
Oh, well,
Twilight gave a nervous laugh, rubbing the back of her neck.
I had gone to the library to do some studying, and I kinda lost track of time. It wasn't until the librarian kicked me out that I realized how late it was. I started walking home, and I ran into those two guys, and, well, you know the rest of the story.
You spent all day studying in the library? Sunset laughed. Jeez, you are a nerd.
Hey!
Twilight looked indignant.
What about you? Aren't you the smartest girl in school?
Yeah, but I don't have to study. It all just comes naturally. Except for history. Twilight snorted.
You have a hard time in history?
Yes, but it isn't my fault. It's boring and there's too many dates to remember. And all you humans do is kill each other.
We do more than that.
Twilight argued.
Sure, we have our flaws, but we accomplish so much by working together. I mean, we put a man on the moon and sent a rover to Mars. Has the pony world ever done that?
No, Sunset admitted. But we did lock a mare inside the moon.
You locked someone inside the moon?
Yeah, long story. Sunset waved it off. Twilight laughed again.
Well, if you're really having trouble, maybe I could tutor you sometime,
she offered. Sunset rolled her eyes. Please, I don't need tutoring. The neighborhood they had entered into was a collection of perfectly ordered houses, each with a well-manicured lawn and perfectly trimmed hedges. It looked like the textbook definition of suburbia. In fact, Sunset thought it would have been creepy if the houses hadn't at least been painted different colors. Aside from the paint patterns, personal ornaments, and various cars in each driveway, all the houses looked the same. Twilight stopped in front of a light blue one with a small fountain in front of the porch. She beamed at Sunset, blushing slightly.
Thanks again for walking me home.
Meh.
Is that all you say whenever someone thanks you?
More or less. Sunset shrugged. Twilight shook her head in disbelief.
Oh!
She lit up and reached into her backpack.
I can't believe I almost forgot again. I've been meaning to give this back to you.
She pulled out a small, pink unicorn and held it up to Sunset.
You left this on the bridge. I, thought you might want it back.
Sunset took the unicorn into her hands, staring at it before looking back at Twilight. Thanks. I guess.
You're welcome. See? That's how you respond when someone says thank you.
With another roll of her eyes, Sunset turned and started her long walk home.
Bye, Sunset. See you tomorrow.
Twilight called enthusiastically. Whatever. Sunset held up the unicorn, scrutinizing it as she thought. Perfect. I accidentally made Twilight Sparkle my friend. I hate irony. Almost as much as I hate you, she said to the pink unicorn named Twilight Sparkle.
Yes.
She made the unicorn answer in a squeaky voice.
But now you hate me as a friend.
That doesn't make any sense.
Neither does friendship.
Sunset turned her head and saw a curious bystander staring at her. Mind your own business, she snapped, scaring him off.
That wasn't very nice,
the unicorn said. Yeah, I'm so setting you on fire when I get home. Her voice now hoarse. Horse. I'm sorry. What else do you want? A cookie and a pat on the head? Oh, that was a funny one. Oh my god.
Ow!
Sounded like Twilight. Oh my god.
Long Road to Friendship, Chapter 9. Sunset turned the corner and rested against the wall, taking deep, heavy breaths as she tried to recover from the sprint she had just taken. It was close by. She could still feel it. It was only a matter of time before it found her again. Sunset wasn't sure how much longer she could keep running. Her lungs burned, and her throat felt drier than the San Palomino desert back in Equestria. Still, she couldn't stay put for long. She couldn't let herself be caught. With a deep breath, Sunset bolted down the hallway once more, leaping out of the way as one of the lockers opened up, and a pair of shadowy hands tried to snatch at her. The deformed, endless corridors that made up this haunting facsimile of Canterlot High twisted on into the darkness, and Sunset could feel herself nearly tripping on the unseen holes in the floor beneath her. Turning onto a staircase that stretched on into infinity, Sunset could hear the flapping of wings, growing ever closer as she ran.
Come out, little sun. I thought you wanted friends.
That's arguable, Sunset thought as she began taking the steps 3 at a time. Just as she finally reached the top, something grabbed her by the leg, pulling her back down several steps. She dreaded what she would find when she turned around and decided to just blindly kick at her target. Her boot collided with something, and it let out a slow moan as it released her. When Sunset had safely reached the second floor again, she chanced to look back and saw that she had kicked Applejack in the face. Only Applejack looked like she had barely registered the kick as painful. In fact, her expression was completely vacant, and when she opened her eyes, Sunset was horrified to see them glossed over with a familiar teal coloring. Applejack moaned again and began climbing after Sunset, who tore into a run, wanting to distance herself from the zombie as quickly as she could. Unfortunately, as she ran, more and more zombified students began to crop up, coming out from within the lockers and pouring out of the classrooms, lumbering after her. The entire school was filled with their bone-chilling groans, making Sunset hold her palms over her ears. Yet the noise persisted, and above the moaning, she could still hear the wing beats of her true predator. She turned down another hallway and was devastated to see it was a dead end. There was only one other door, and it opened up to reveal one more zombie. Flash Sentry. He trudged forward, mouth agape, forcing Sunset back until she remembered the predestined army marching towards her, locking her in.
You know,
Flash groaned.
they'd always asked me why I was dating you, and I thought I might be able to make you a better person. I guess I was wrong.
Clenching her fists, Sunset charged forward, knocking him aside and finding sanctuary in the small classroom beyond. She shut the door and dragged the teacher's desk over to barricade it, just as the moans and fists of her stalkers pressed against the other side. Sunset leaned against the desk, panting. This can't be happening. It just can't.
Oh, it's happening all right.
A demonic voice whispered into her ear. A pair of claws grabbed her by the shoulders and flipped her around, bringing Sunset face to face with her monstrous other half. Her red skin seemed to glow against the nearly pitch-black background and was complemented by her fiery hair and tail. The demon lifted Sunset up into the air, flapping her wings as they rose higher and higher, revealing her sharp fangs as she grinned viciously.
Hiya, sweetheart. Miss me? You know you can't just run away from yourself.
Sunset gazed into her maniacal blue eyes, too terrified to speak. The demon just laughed, then opened her mouth wider, the inside of her throat glowing intensely. Sunset's eyes widened in horror as she realized what was about to happen. Just as the fire erupted, Sunset was able to scream. Sunset shot up from her mattress, drenched in cold sweat, struggling to choke down a gasp of air. Her entire body shook, both from fear and from the chill wind that swept through the factory. She hugged herself to try to retain some warmth and stop her violent shivering. Another nightmare. Sunset had been having them on and off ever since the night of the dance, and they were always one of 2 scenarios. Either Sunset was being chased by the demon and the zombified students of her school, or she was the demon, killing off students with psychotic glee. As much as Sunset wanted to blame the elements and pass it off as some sort of side effect of her curse, she knew this was probably more psychological than anything. She reasoned that it stemmed from her guilty conscience, giving her more reason to hate it. When her shivering finally stopped, Sunset relaxed her arms, bringing them to her sides and leaning back in a casual manner. Her hand brushed against something soft, and she pulled up the pink unicorn she had left on her bed hours earlier. Right. You. Sunset had every intention to burn it when she had gotten home. She sat down with a lighter and was fully prepared to watch it go up in smoke. Instead, she just sat there, staring at it for an hour before deciding to do it later. She wasn't sure what was stopping her, but knew whatever it was, she would get over it eventually and burn the stupid toy. Sunset stared at it for a while longer before hurling it against the far wall. It smacked against it and tumbled to the floor without so much as a peep. Sunset fell back against her pillow, staring up at the ceiling, while she rested her hands beneath her head. In a squeaky voice, she said,
Maybe you'll feel better if you talk about your problems.
She climbed back into a sitting position and glared at the plushie, barely visible in the darkness.
Nobody asked you. But I just want to help. I like helping people, even if it's none of my business.
Yeah, well, that's a really annoying trait you have, princess. Sunset put her hand to her head and glanced over at her alarm clock. 4:32 in the morning, and I'm talking to a stuffed animal. I have finally reached rock bottom.
On the bright side, you can only go up from here.
Yep, I've lost it. At 7 o'clock, Sunset dragged herself out of bed, having gotten only another hour of sleep before tossing and turning the rest of the night, fighting the urge to project her thoughts onto the Twilight Sparkle toy. After a cold shower and a mediocre breakfast, she was starting to run low on food again, she headed out the door, backpack over her shoulder and eyes bloodshot. It was another cold, crisp autumn morning, and the small tears in Sunset's jacket allowed the cool air to snake through and nip at her skin. She could feel goosebumps rise in her arms, and was now grateful she had chosen to wear jeans today. The sun rose over the neighborhood Sunset journeyed through, bathing everything in its fresh light. Golden rays streamed through the red and orange leaves that fell from the trees, coating the ground in a colorful camouflage. Sunset let out a yawn, trying to admire the beautiful sight, but was too marred by the lack of sleep to fully appreciate it. Though she did enjoy the melodic crunch of the dying leaves under her boots. Drawing close to the school, she could hear the mindless babble of her congregating peers as they gathered together at the front of the entrance, greeting each other and making plans for the weekend. It was with a frown that Sunset realized she was about to endure another weekend without anything to do, well, other than burn Twilight Sparkle to a crisp. Walking onto campus, Sunset heard a small, hesitant voice that forced her to stop.
Please, won't you volunteer at the local animal shelter? Help those who can't help themselves? Oh, excuse me, would you like to... No? Oh, that's okay then.
Crap! Sunset inwardly screamed. She had completely forgotten about Fluttershy's weekly, and pathetic, attempts to garner attention for the animal shelter. This was normally the time Sunset would walk up to her, mock her for being so fragile and quiet, then go about her merry day. Instead, Sunset stomped over for an entirely different reason. Approaching Fluttershy, Sunset choked out, I'd like to volunteer. Fluttershy took a small step back, looking both startled and confused.
You would? But I thought you didn't like animals?
Sunset tightened her jaw. Yes, I would. And no, I don't.
Then why are you volunteering?
Because you asked. Fluttershy kept the stack of paper she was holding close to her chest with one hand, while she used the other to play with her hair.
Well, if you really want to.
Fluttershy gave Sunset a look of sad innocence.
This isn't some mean joke, is it?
Despite all the mean things she could potentially do to Fluttershy at the shelter, Sunset knew she wouldn't stoop that low. She may dislike animals, but she wasn't going to abuse any. She had technically been one. No, it isn't. I promise. Fluttershy instantly brightened up to levels Sunset had rarely seen.
Okay then.
She practically squealed. She handed Sunset a flyer.
Here are the directions. Do you think you could come by tomorrow? Maybe around 8?
Sunset sighed. Yeah, sure.
No, thank you so much. You're gonna have so much fun, I promise. Just wait until you see all the cute baby puppies and stray kittens and the...
Sunset tuned her out as she walked away, stuffing the flyer into her coat pocket. Well, at least I have plans for the weekend now. The day had progressed in a relatively smooth fashion, with Sunset fortunate enough to not run into anyone undesirable, at least until she was on her way to lunch. She stowed her bag in her locker and followed the crowd into the cafeteria when Miss Celestia appeared in the corner of her eye. She quickly tried to avert her attention somewhere else and blend in with students, but the damage had been done. Miss Shimmer, may I see you for a minute? Damn! Sunset slumped her shoulders and sulked over to Celestia, who was waiting with her arms crossed. Care to explain where you disappeared to yesterday? I was helping Twilight Sparkle home after I helped her stop crying her eyes out. Celestia gave her a skeptical look. Really? That seems uncharacteristically nice of you. Yes, really. Sunset said moodily. And trust me, it was a one-time thing. There was a tapping noise that came from Celestia's foot as she continued to regard Sunset. Well, I suppose I can let it go this time since you did help a fellow student. But no more ditching detention. Understand, young lady? Yes, Sunset answered, rolling her eyes ever so slightly. Good. Celestia's face and voice softened. Now, are you all right, Sunset? Is there anything you'd like to talk about? Sunset looked up into her face, taken aback by the sudden personal inquiry. In that moment, Sunset could see her mentor smiling down at her and making sure everything was all right in her tiny little world. Sunset was almost compelled to break right there and tell Celestia everything. Apologize for the things the principal knew nothing about. Apologize for things that happened in Equestria, hoping that somehow her old teacher would feel the apology as well. Sunset was almost compelled. Instead, she shook her head and said, "No to both questions." "Are you sure?" Celestia asked. "Not really." Sunset pinched the bridge of her nose and sighed in frustration. "Forget it. Just forget it. I just don't want to talk about anything." Before Celestia could ask another question, Sunset broke into a fast walk, making her way to lunch. After grabbing a tray of food and seating herself at her lonely corner table, Sunset closed her eyes and took a moment to gather her thoughts. What was with everyone suddenly wanting to know her personal life? It wasn't like it was any of their business anyway. Taking up her fork, Sunset absent-mindedly picked at her salad, her appetite now gone. People really need to keep their noses out of my affairs. Twilight dropped down into the seat next to her.
Hey, I heard you were gonna help Fluttershy tomorrow at the animal shelter. That's really nice of you.
Sunset looked up at the ceiling.
Seriously?
Looking back at Twilight, she asked coolly, "First of all, what makes you think you can just sit here? And second, what's with your obsession of whether or not I'm nice?" Twilight smirked.
It's a free school, and I can sit wherever I want,
she said, playfully matching Sunset's snark.
And I'm not obsessed. I just said it was a really nice thing of you to do.
Sunset made a violent stab at a piece of lettuce. Yeah, don't remind me.
Okay, I'm not obsessed, but I am confused. Why do you act like every nice thing you do is somehow a bad thing? Or that you don't want to do it?
Because I don't want to do it. Twilight scrunched her face, looking thoroughly perplexed.
Then why do you do them?
Feeling no pressure on her throat, Sunset grinned, mostly to herself. Let's just say I'm clearing my conscience.
Well, okay,
Twilight said, sounding more confused than before. Hey, Sparkle, wanna do me a favor?
Sure.
Twilight smiled brightly. Sunset turned and looked in her shining, violet eyes. Go away. Twilight pouted in an unamused fashion, but stood up, taking her tray with her.
Fine. But I'd watch out for Rainbow Dash. She doesn't seem too happy with you.
With a nod of farewell, Twilight returned to the other table where, sure enough, Rainbow was staring Sunset down with fervent intensity. Gee, I can't imagine why. Sunset muttered to herself, returning to her salad. As the school day came to an end, Sunset found herself mopping floors once more, ordered to finish the job she should have done yesterday. The students had fled from the school faster today than the previous, no doubt because of the welcoming weekend and all the promises it held. For Sunset, it just promised a day of helping the spineless chicken pick up after mindless animals. Fun, fun, Sunset said, her voice oozing with false enthusiasm. She brought the mop back and forth across the hallway, backing up as she cleaned. It was horribly dull work.
Hey!
A voice cracked through the calming quiet. Sunset turned around and found Rainbow Dash standing at the end of the hall, arms folded and looking like someone had spit in her sports drink. Caution, wet floors, Sunset said with a bored tone. Unfolding her arms, Rainbow marched down the hall, her fists now balled at her sides. She didn't stop until she was inches away from Sunset, who could now smell her disgusting sweat.
What are you planning?
Rainbow growled through her teeth. I have no idea what you're talking about, Sunset answered calmly, and I suggest you back up out of my face.
Instead, Rainbow grabbed Sunset by the arms and pinned her against the lockers, making them rattle with enough noise to wake the dead.
Quit lying to my face!
Rainbow snarled.
I know you're planning something for tomorrow. Why else would you offer to help Fluttershy?
Maybe because I'm trying to be a nice person. Sunset couldn't help but grin in a nefarious manner.
Bullshit!
Such language, Dash. Not very appropriate for a school setting. Rainbow brought her up and slammed her against the lockers again, wiping off Sunset's smile. She glared darkly at Rainbow. All right, I'm done being nice. You have 3 seconds to let go of me, or I will get violent. 1. Their eyes locked again, each one daring the other to continue with their gambit. Rainbow's grip didn't slacken, and the fire in her eyes never died. 2. Sunset would have loved to kick Rainbow's butt all across the campus, but she wasn't in the mood to get expelled. Had they been anywhere else, Rainbow would be on the ground already. Still, if she didn't let go, Sunset wasn't afraid to use aggression. Just as Sunset was about to reach 3, Rainbow released her arms and took a step back, looking angrier than ever. Smart move, Dash. Sunset rolled her shoulders. Pointing a finger, Rainbow said,
The only reason I'm letting you go is because everyone else has some stupid idea about giving you the benefit of a doubt. And I'd look bad if I beat your face in before tomorrow.
She took a step forward.
But I'm warning you, if you hurt Fluttershy, if you hurt any of them, well, let's just say I won't be going to graduation because I'll be doing time. You won't be going at all.
Before Sunset could come up with a retort, Rainbow turned on her heel and stomped away, looking back only to show Sunset she meant business. Impressive threat, Dash, Sunset whispered, leaning against the locker. She frowned. But why? 3 weeks ago, Rainbow hadn't been on speaking terms with most of them. Now, she was willing to fight tooth and nail for them? That made about as much sense as Princess Twilight deciding to defend this world instead of Equestria. Sunset picked up the fallen mop, returning to her task. That doll was right. Friendship doesn't make any sense.
Long Road to Friendship, Chapter 10. Sunset awoke early on Saturday, her eyes lined with sleep dust and her hair a wild mess. She groaned as she sat up in her bed, rolling out the stiffness in her neck and shoulders. Maybe it was just her, but her mattress felt like it was getting more uncomfortable every night. Her clock read 7, giving Sunset exactly an hour to get ready before she would be forced to the animal shelter to help Fluttershy. She shuddered, thinking about all of the smelly animals she would have to pretend to care about. Rising from her mattress, Sunset stretched herself out before starting her morning routine of bathing and getting dressed. She would hate to be dragged down to the shelter looking like a frizzy-haired troll. By the time she had finished her cereal, it was 7:45. As she put her bowl in the sink, Sunset wondered what would happen if she headed for the shelter on her own accord. Would she still feel the jolt down her spine and lose basic control of her functions until she arrived at her destination? She walked back upstairs to grab her jacket, also curious as to how anyone there would respond to her wearing leather. On her way out, Twilight Sparkle squeaked, "Have a good time." Sunset paused in the doorway and beat her palm against her forehead. "Stop it, stop it, stop it! You are not doing yourself any mental favors." She looked back at the plushie sitting on her desk. "You're ash when I come home." Biting down in her tongue was the only way Sunset made it downstairs without having Twilight Sparkle comment back. It was another cool day, with the wind whistling through the alley outside of Sunset's factory home. She shut the door tight behind her and started down the road, pulling out the flyer Fluttershy had handed her. The shelter wasn't too far from where Sunset was, so she decided she'd just walk the distance instead of paying for the bus fare. Kicking an empty soda can as she walked, Sunset felt like it was another day of school, only the street had been completely devoid of any other students. She envied them, and their good fortune, and being able to sleep in on a Saturday morning. An odd tingle crawled down Sunset's spine, not like the sudden jolt she would normally receive, but like someone was trying to tickle her. Curious, she stopped walking, trying to test the limits of her enchantment. Finding that she wasn't being forced to continue, Sunset tried to turn around and walk back home. Unfortunately, that's when the jolt started, and Sunset was, once again, being dragged down the road, robbed of her will. Okay, so if I do something preemptively, I can stay in control. But if I try to get out of it, then I'm forced into it. I should probably write this stuff down. The animal shelter was a square, nondescript building thrown in between two other stores. In fact, if it weren't for her curse, Sunset might have walked right past it. The only thing that identified it were the words Canterlot Animal Shelter and Rescue Center, printed in the window. Sunset stepped into a rather bland-looking waiting room decorated with only a coffee table and a few chairs. From the back, however, she could hear the cries of several animals, most notably dogs. She approached the counter and tapped the bell, wondering if anyone could even hear the chime over the dissonance in the back room. Evidently they could, as Fluttershy appeared from the back door, wearing a white overcoat that gave her a very professional look.
Sunset,
Fluttershy said with surprise.
you actually came.
You thought I wasn't going to show?
Well, not really.
Fluttershy grew quiet, looking down at her shoes. Sunset couldn't entirely blame her. She would never have considered doing this in the past. She shrugged it off and said, "Well, I'm here now, so what do you want me to do?" Fluttershy perked up, smiling from ear to ear.
Oh, it's really quite easy. We just need to take care of the animals that are here today. Feed them, play with them, bathe them, and make sure they're given some love.
Yeah, easy. Sunset rolled her eyes. Well then, let's get this over with. She made a move to advance, but Fluttershy stepped in her path.
Are you sure you want to do this? I mean, it's great that you're here, but, if you don't want to be here...
Fluttershy, I said I was going to help, so I'm going to help. Besides, I'm not sure if I could leave anyway. Brightening up again, Fluttershy took Sunset by the arm.
Then let's go. First, you'll need an overcoat. Oh, and I should introduce you to my supervisor.
Fluttershy dragged Sunset through another door leading to a small office, overcrowded with filing cabinets and a small desk where an older woman sat, doing paperwork. She had a navy blue skin tone and sea green hair pulled into a tight bun. On her face was a pair of reading glasses, giving her an appearance of a typical librarian. She looked up at Sunset and narrowed her eyes.
Miss Tenderheart, this is Sunset Shimmer.
Fluttershy said, missing the cold glare Sunset was receiving. Oh, so this is the girl who sends Fluttershy to me almost every day in tears, she said in a steely voice, rising from her chair. Sunset forced a nervous laugh and put on a fake smile. She was now aware of her breakfast churning in her stomach like a raging sea. About that, Miss Tenderheart was advancing on her, wagging her finger in a scolding manner that Sunset normally would have found ridiculous. But the anger in the woman's eyes seemed to make it threatening.
Do you know what you've put her through? I can't believe you would show your face around here. Miss Tenderheart,
Fluttershy squeaked.
And wearing leather of all things. This is some kind of joke to you, isn't it? Well, there is no way I'm letting you anywhere near these poor animals.
Sunset was backed against the door, feeling incredibly small against Miss Tenderheart's intimidating demeanor. Her tongue was glued to the inside of her mouth, preventing her from saying anything in her defense. Not that Sunset could come up with anything anyways. Fluttershy threw herself in between the two before Miss Tenderheart could yell any more.
Please, Miss Tenderheart, Sunset said she was sorry. She's trying to be a better person now, and she really wants to help.
Miss Tenderheart scoffed and gave both girls a lidded stare.
I'll believe that when I see it.
She refocused her fiery glare back on Sunset, emitting a small growl before speaking again.
I've got my eye on her. If she puts one toe out of line...
She left the threat hanging in the air, returning to her desk. Well, you're not the only one, Sunset thought bitterly. Miss Tenderheart's dagger glare thoroughly reminding her of Rainbow Dash. Fluttershy grabbed a coat from the nearby rack and quickly ushered Sunset out of the door. She handed Sunset a white lab coat, her cheeks flushed with the same pink tone as her hair.
I'm so sorry about that. I didn't know she would react like that.
Sunset tried to shrug it off, but found something about Miss Tenderheart's words unnerved her. Before Fluttershy could open the back door, Sunset asked, Did I
really make you come here in tears every day?
Fluttershy hesitated, her back to Sunset.
Oh, no, not every day. Just, well, most days.
There was a pregnant pause in which Sunset felt the seconds drag into years. Had she really caused Fluttershy so much pain that she came crying to her volunteer work almost every day for the last 3 years? Had Sunset truly been that detached from the well-being of those around her?
Well, yeah. It's not like anyone else matters in this world. Whatever happens to them is their own problem.
Sunset ran a hand through her hair. No wonder Rainbow hated her. She was compelled to say something to Fluttershy, but when she came back to reality, Sunset had found she had already gone into the next room. Sunset followed suit and was greeted to a cacophony of dogs barking with a few cat cries mixed in. The room was really just a long hallway with large kennels lining both sides of the walls. Each kennel was filled with a food and water bowl, a few pet toys, a bed, and an animal pressing its face against the bars. Fluttershy giggled as she stopped at each cage, unlocking the doors and leading the animals out like the Pied Piper. They jumped and nipped at her heels, begging for her love and attention, completely ignoring Sunset. Not that she had much of a problem with that.
So, what exactly is the plan here?
Sunset asked, marveling at the crowd amassed around Fluttershy. It was then that she noticed some of the animals were adorned with cuts and bruises. There was a dog with his paw bandaged up, and a cat that was missing half of its fur. Looking up from the German Shepherd that she was petting, Fluttershy said,
Well, I'm going to take them all to the back so they can stretch and exercise. While I'm back there, could you clean the cages and refill their food and water bowls?
Yeah, sure.
Of the two, Sunset thought she was probably getting the easier job.
Fiery-haired demon!
Sunset glared at Fluttershy, who had turned back to her furry fan club.
What did you call me?
What? Oh,
Fluttershy clasped her hands over her mouth, blushing furiously again.
that wasn't me. It was...
Sunset's evil!
There was a fluttering of wings, and Sunset felt something slap her in the face as it flew by, perching itself on Fluttershy's shoulder. It was bright green, with a yellow belly and a large, curved beak.
Sunset's evil! She's evil!
Fluttershy stroked the parrot under the chin.
Sunset, this is Peter, Miss Tenderheart's parrot.
Of course he is.
Sunset deadpanned. Fluttershy fidgeted, doing her usual nervous tell of hiding her face in her long hair.
He may sometimes pick up some words, Miss Tenderheart, and I say, I'm sorry.
She added quietly.
Just show me where the food and stuff are.
Sunset snapped, not in any mood to hear why even a parrot was bad-mouthing her. After Fluttershy showed her to the supply cabinet, Sunset took the broom and dustpan, watching Fluttershy lead the rest of the stray animals through another door. As she exited, Peter turned his head to look back.
Evil demon! Quack!
Sunset clenched her jaw until her teeth hurt. She severely hoped that bird hadn't heard that from Fluttershy initially, for her sake. Once more, Sunset found herself sweeping up floors and doing other menial chores.
How has my life deteriorated to this?
She thought as she swept up dog poop out of one of the lower cages. She wanted to think that it could be worse, but she was hard-pressed to think of a more depressing situation she could be in.
How can Fluttershy do this day in and day out?
Trading the broom for the bag of food, Sunset's thoughts turned dark as she reflected on what Miss Tenderheart and Fluttershy had said. She imagined Fluttershy filling up the bowls of food of these filthy pets, silently sobbing over the cruel things Sunset had done to her. Out of everyone at Canterlot High, Sunset had been especially vicious and obscene towards her. It wasn't out of spite or hatred or anything of the like. Fluttershy just made it so easy. Though hardly anyone ever stood up to Sunset, Fluttershy practically rolled over when she had claimed domination over the school. When their friendship had broken up, no one ever came to Fluttershy's defense, and she did nothing but mewl in terror whenever Sunset confronted her. Perhaps it was her lack of spine that drew Sunset towards her.
Sunset cringed as she thought of every underhanded trick and bullying act she had committed against Fluttershy. Verbal abuse, borderline physical abuse, lying, blackmail, damaging her personal belongings, crippling her homework, stealing things from her locker, even threatening to report her animals to Principal Celestia if she didn't follow orders. Sunset's only saving grace was that she never threatened to physically harm them. Still, that didn't make up for anything else she had done. Out of everyone, Fluttershy had the most right to not forgive and forget. And yet, she had. And just like the others, bearing Rainbow, Fluttershy had forgiven Sunset of her transgressions and welcomed her with open, if not hesitant, arms. Though Sunset supposed she had every reason to be a bit wary. Looking down, Sunset realized she was pouring too much food into one of the silver dishes, creating a mountain of doggy kibbles. She sighed and started scooping some back into the bag with her hand. Kindness. That was the element Twilight Sparkle had called out when she addressed Fluttershy. Is that what this is, then? Is she just fulfilling her role as the bearer of kindness? No, she was always nice, even before that princess showed up. She isn't defined by her element, she defines her element. She's just naturally kind and forgiving, which makes her so easy to walk over. A long time ago, Sunset had affirmed not to do any favors for anyone unless it helped her as well. When she had come to Canterlot High and saw Fluttershy, she doubled her conviction. Being nice to everyone would get you nowhere. However, being cold and callous had proven to only get you so far, and the fall from the top of the hill had been much harder. As Sunset continued to ponder over Fluttershy's disposition and her own moral dilemmas, she methodically continued her ordained task, giving each kennel fresh food and water, paying close attention so she didn't make another mess. Lost in her own world, she didn't hear the soft pitter-patter of small paws breaking across the hard floor. So when something wet licked the back of her leg, Sunset jumped a foot into the air, scattering kibbles across the tile. She turned around and glared down at the small dog sniffing her boot. It looked up at her with large eyes and a twitching nose, regarding her curiously. Shouldn't you be outside with the others? Go on, chew. Sunset tried to wave it off with a hand, but the dog stayed firmly in place, wagging its tail. Sunset narrowed her eyes, taking note of the creature in front of her. She wasn't sure what type of dog it was, but it looked rather scrawny, like it hadn't had a decent meal in some time. It had a shabby white coat with a brown circle around its left eye. Sunset's heart dropped a little as she looked at its long ears and saw one of them appeared to be torn. She knelt down on one knee, trying to take a closer look, but that was when the dog took a few tentative steps backward. She eased one hand forward, saying, "Hey, it's okay, I'm not gonna hurt you." The dog leaned forward, smelling the kibbles on Sunset's hand, and began to lick her palm, scooting a little closer. Sunset reached with her other hand and scratched the back of its neck. "See? I'm not a—" Sunset's tongue held fast, unable to finish a sentence she knew wasn't true. She was a monster, but maybe she didn't have to always act like one. After the dog had grown satisfied from licking the residue off Sunset's hand, she gestured to the fallen kibbles around them. "So, wanna help me out a little?" The dog barked and quickly snapped up the stray pieces of food, allowing Sunset to finish her job. Afterwards, Sunset led it through the door at the back and found a large, spacious enclosure shaded by the two buildings standing on either side of the animal shelter. Toys were littered about the green grass, which had been flattened in several places from dogs rolling in it. A separate area had been fenced off for the cats and filled with scratching posts and fake mice. To her amusement, Sunset found Fluttershy down on all fours, playing tug-of-war with another dog. Upon seeing Sunset approach, Fluttershy dropped the toy from her mouth and jumped to her feet, blushing again.
"Oh, you're finished?"
Sunset nodded. "Yep." She pointed to the small dog that had followed her out. "I found this little guy wandering around inside." Fluttershy gasped.
"Oh, Spot! I was wondering where you had run off to."
"Spot? Really?" Spot wagged his tail at Fluttershy before picking up a chew toy and darting off. Sunset watched him before taking an interest in all the other strays milling about.
either lounging around on the grass or partaking in some activity like chasing their own tail or playing tug-of-war with another dog. A frown appeared on Sunset's face as she noticed something about a few of the dogs and even a few of the cats. Why do some of them have bruises like that? Fluttershy sighed and hunched over, her eyes downcast.
Some people take their anger out on poor animals. We don't just take in lost or stray ones. We have to rescue pets that are being abused as well.
A tear rolled down her cheek.
It's not fair, hurting something that can't defend itself.
Why didn't you ever defend yourself, Fluttershy? Why did you let me treat you so bad? Fluttershy's voice came out as a hoarse whisper.
I thought that if I didn't do what you said, you'd
Take it out on your pets? Her silence wasn't answer enough for Sunset. She would have liked to think that her threats against animals were hollow, but after throwing a fireball at 5 students, Sunset wasn't sure if there was a line she wouldn't have crossed. Fluttershy, Sunset bit her lip. I just want to say everything I did to you, I'm sorry. Her stomach churned. Apologizing from her heart still made her feel nauseous. Staring with large, doe eyes, Fluttershy looked at Sunset like she had just transformed into a magnificent butterfly.
You really mean it?
Surprisingly, yes, Sunset said with melancholy. I was pretty horrible to you. Even when you compare it to what I did to the rest of the school, I don't know how you dealt with it for all those years. Fluttershy looked away, but not before Sunset saw the grim expression across her face. She hugged herself and said in a barely audible voice,
Sometimes I didn't think I could deal with it anymore. Sometimes I didn't want to.
The last sentence struck Sunset in the heart, cutting into the conscience that she was still becoming aware of as she fully grasped the underlying meaning in Fluttershy's words. Please, tell me you didn't really consider... There was a weak nod, Fluttershy still keeping her back to Sunset.
It was never for long periods of time. Just briefly, when I would fall asleep. This
She gestured to the dogs playing in the grass.
was all I had to look forward to every day. But it was enough. If I left, then who would give them the love and care that they needed?
Sunset leaned against the back wall, feeling numb. She couldn't decide what was worse, actively trying to kill 6 human beings, or knowing that she had indirectly caused one of them to contemplate doing it to themselves. Fluttershy, she said breathlessly. I'm so sorry. I never bothered to think how far I could have pushed some of you. When Fluttershy didn't respond, Sunset continued, which makes me even more confused on why you forgave me. Out of everyone, why don't you hate me the most? Fluttershy finally turned back around, tears flowing down her cheek. Despite this, she put on a soft smile.
Because everyone deserves to be shown a little kindness.
The rest of the day wasn't as bad as Sunset had originally anticipated. She and Fluttershy had talked for a while longer, and while Sunset couldn't call her a friend just yet, she was slowly beginning to understand why Equestria, why both worlds, put so much value in friendship. Spending time with someone and just talking about normal things actually felt nice. It might have felt better if Peter the Parrot hadn't been constantly flying around screeching obscenities at Sunset. Monster or not, Sunset wanted to strangle the bird. After the animals had gotten their morning exercise, Sunset and Fluttershy had proceeded to bathe them, a chore that proved to be both difficult and messy for all involved. Twice, Sunset had been knocked into the tub that they had used to bathe the dogs, coming out covered with stray hair and shampoo. When Fluttershy had burst out laughing the second time, Sunset accidentally sprayed her with the hose. From there, everything had quickly dissolved into a full-scale water war, leaving both girls soaked and shivering. When they waded back inside to put the animals back in their kennels and dry off, Miss Tenderheart had handed them towels, eyeing Sunset with a little less hostility. Both girls sat outside under the afternoon sun, wrapped in their towels and cupping mugs of hot chocolate in their hands. Since there were no spare clothes, both of them had to make do with simply drying off naturally. "Well," Sunset said, evenly after taking another sip of her warm drink, "I suppose today was not as horrible as I thought it was going to be."
Is that just your way of saying you had a fun time?
Fluttershy asked. "More or less." Sunset lifted her cup to hide the thin smile crawling across her face. "Don't get any ideas, though. This was just a one-time thing. Probably." Fluttershy beamed at her.
Well, thank you for all your help, Sunset. I appreciate it.
Sunset lowered her cup, furrowing her brows slightly. "That's what I don't get, though. You and Miss Smiles-a-lot over there seem to handle everything pretty fine. Why do you need volunteers?" Brushing a strand of wet hair out of her face, Fluttershy said,
It's kind of an idea we had. You see, we thought if we asked people to come and volunteer, instead of just outright asking them to adopt, they might feel less pressured. By volunteering, they could get to really connect with one of the animals before taking it home.
She let out a content sigh.
And it's always nice to have someone split the work with you once in a while.
I see. Sunset nodded. That brings me up to my next question. Where are the rest of your friends? Fluttershy blew at some of the steam curling out of her mug.
They were all busy today. And besides, most of them already have pets. But they do volunteer every now and again. So does Miss Celestia.
Celestia comes here?
Mm-hmm. She's a big animal lover.
Sunset smirked, reminding her of her former teacher and the phoenix she kept as a pet. Sunset was finding more similarities between the two personas every day. They sat there for another hour, neither of them saying much, opt to just enjoy the cool fall sunshine and hot chocolate instead. When Sunset felt her clothes were dry enough to walk home in, she stood up and discarded her blanket. Well, Fluttershy, I'll be taking my leave now. Again, it wasn't a complete waste of my time. Fluttershy nodded up at her.
Thank you for volunteering. And I think some of the animals even like you. And, thank you for apologizing like that. That meant a lot, too.
Sunset turned, scrunching her face. Don't thank me for that. I shouldn't have hurt you like that in the first place.
But you realize your mistake and apologize for it. Even that should be recognized, so thank you.
Shoving her hands into her pocket, Sunset marched towards the building. I'll see you around, Fluttershy. She made her way through the holding room, glancing as some of the dogs wagged their tails while they watched her pass by, barking in joy. She sincerely hoped they would all find good homes. None of them deserved to be alone. Sunset re-entered the front room, heading for the door when a loud cough caught her attention. She looked to see Miss Tenderheart standing in the doorway to her office. Peter perched on her shoulder. Well, Miss Shimmer, I suppose I was wrong about you. Maybe you're not quite as bad as I made you out to be. Pushing the door open, Sunset murmured, No, you're right. I am. Long Road to Friendship, Chapter 11. Time was now something Sunset had just a little too much of. It was only the middle of the afternoon when she exited the Canterlot Animal Shelter, hands in her pockets as she trudged down the street. She didn't feel like going home, but the only thing that awaited her was a stupid doll that she had projected her inner thoughts onto, and a can of ravioli for dinner. Her heart was still rather heavy from her time with Fluttershy, and she had a feeling that lounging on her mattress would not help in the slightest. Mulling over what a horrible person she was probably wasn't healthy. Still, part of her heart just couldn't let go of the negative impact she had on Fluttershy's life. How many others had she pushed to the brink of despair? How many had she emotionally scarred? Yet, even when keeping them in mind, part of her just didn't want to care. What was an individual's decision to her? Was it really her fault if they couldn't handle the harshness of life? Why should she care if someone was miserable or not? Because you are the one causing their misery. Sunset let out a snarl of frustration, rewarding her with surprised glances from those around her. She didn't particularly care, though. She was too busy waging war with herself. For years, Sunset had only cared about herself, never stopping to look at life from another person's point of view. Why start now? Why care about any of them? She stopped and leaned against a light post, raising a hand to her heart.
Because
Everyone deserves to be shown a little kindness.
despite everything I've done to them, they still want to be nice to me. Maybe it's time I really just tried to be friends with them. What's the worst that could happen?
You could get hurt. Sunset pushed off the pole and continued meandering down the street, smirking ever so slightly.
I'm a big girl. I think I can handle myself.
She pushed away the rest of her thoughts, tired of her inner monologue. She was going to try to make friends by the end of it. She was going to be, well, maybe not nice, but at least decent for a change. If only so she could look in the mirror and not see a demon staring back at her. Unconsciously, Sunset raised a hand and held it in front of her face. Staring at it, she could almost feel the claws lurking underneath, see her skin turning blood red. She shuddered violently at the memory, wanting to reject it and lock it away in the deepest region of her heart. Away with the part of her that had enjoyed it. Amidst her aimless wandering, Sunset found herself in front of Canterlot High, unsure of exactly what led her here.
Familiarity, perhaps,
Sunset murmured, stepping onto the campus. She moved in front of the marble statue, looking up at the proud horse positioned at the top, shining in the sun with all of its majesty. Her eyes moved down to the reflective base, where she caught herself looking back. Sunset never realized how much disdain and spite was held in her eyes. Out of curiosity, Sunset placed her palm on the cold, smooth surface and closed her eyes, funneling her concentration into trying to see if she could peek beyond the veil that divorced the two worlds.
Just one look. Just to remind me it's still there. Something. Anything.
Yet, no matter how hard Sunset concentrated, all she saw was the darkness of her eyelids. She knew she probably wouldn't be able to see anything, since the moon wasn't even out. But it still left a sting of disappointment. Sunset slumped to her knees, sighing heavily. Of all the places her subconscious mind could have led her, it had to be the only link to her old home. She had enough emotions rolling around through her. Now she could add homesick to the list. She removed her palm from the marble surface, turning it into a fist before slamming it forward. She bit her tongue to stop herself from crying in pain, trying to ignore the throbbing coming from her hand. 30 more moons she'd be stuck here. What would she do when that time was up? Equestria would have changed so much by the time she was able to return home. Could she readjust after being gone so long? Subject herself to the new rule of Princess Twilight Sparkle?
No. Never,
she said, her voice heavy with black antipathy. While Sunset had resolved to at least try and be a better person, there was one being she would never cease hating as long as she lived. It burned far too bright for Sunset to just extinguish it like it was nothing. Twilight had stolen everything from her in Equestria, ruined her plans here, then left her to languish. And now, there was nothing Sunset could do to get back at her. She rose from her spot on the ground, shaking the pain out of her hand. Well, there is one thing I could do to make myself feel better. Sure, it was petty, but Sunset had already established that she was a petty person. One more act wouldn't kill her. The sun was starting to set when Sunset finally began making her way back home. She cut through one of Canterlot's many parks, the cool evening air tousling her hair in front of her face. She parted it out of her vision, only to find a worse sight awaiting her. Across the park, in her soccer uniform, was Rainbow Dash, bidding farewell to some of her teammates. Sunset's face contorted into one of disgust. She was in no mood to hear Rainbow's accusations or judgmental comments. She turned to leave, muttering to herself, "There's no rule saying I have to be friends with all of them." She had only made it 10 steps
when Rainbow's voice pierced her ears.
Hey, where do you think you're going?
Well, I was going home, Sunset grumbled. She turned on her heel to face Rainbow, who was marching towards her like a gladiator entering an arena. Rainbow stopped short, a foot away from Sunset, tapping her foot against the ground in an erratic rhythm.
Well?
She demanded. Sunset crossed her arms. Well, what?
Don't play dumb with me.
Yeah, you're right. I'd probably lose. Watching Rainbow's face glow with volcanic fury gave Sunset an old feeling of satisfaction and enjoyment. Old habits die hard, it seemed, though Sunset argued it wasn't completely unwarranted. Rainbow took a deep breath, her face regaining some of its original blue shade.
Did you do anything to Fluttershy today? And don't try to lie to me.
Not possible. No, I didn't do anything to Fluttershy today. I went in, I helped her with some animals, and I actually just talked with her. It was really kind of nice.
Really?
Rainbow said skeptically.
That's it? That's all you did?
Yep. Sunset crossed her arms. Why? What did you think I was going to do?
Something horrible, like you always do?
Sunset smirked and began to circle around her. Oh, ye of little faith. I wouldn't possibly dream of doing anything that could incur your oh-so-terrible wrath. I made sure I was on my best behavior. Rainbow followed her, making sure Sunset never left her line of sight.
Why does that sound like a giant lie?
Because you want to believe it is.
So if I call Fluttershy right now and ask her what happened, she'll tell me the same thing?
Yes, yes. She'll tell you we danced and sang with all the little woodland creatures about friendship and whatever. Sunset broke out of her circling and started walking away, tired of Rainbow's attitude and growing bored of baiting her.
If I find out you've done anything to her, I'll take you down another peg,
Rainbow shouted after her. Sunset stopped and looked over her shoulder. How about I take you down a peg right now, Miss High and Mighty? And what about all the things you've done to her, Dash?
What?
Rainbow looked taken aback. She wildly shook her head.
I haven't done anything to her.
Exactly. Sunset pointed an accusatory finger. Where were you when I was pushing her around? When I was knocking papers out of her hand, shoving her into the lockers and taking her lunch? Oh, that's right. You were sitting with the rest of your jock friends, pretending not to notice you could fit in with the cool kids. Rainbow gaped at her, her face caught between shock and outrage. An odd noise escaped her throat, sounding like a pained whine. Sunset pressed on. I admit, I was terrible to her. But in all those years, I never once saw you stick up for her. Sunset's eyes widened in realization, and she spread her hands. Which is why you're trying so hard to protect her now, isn't it? You feel guilty about ditching her like that. She snickered. That's touching, really. But it still makes you a hypocrite, doesn't it? Getting mad at me for everything I've done, when you did nothing to stop it. She turned her back and started to walk off again. Face it, Dash. You're almost as bad as I am. A sharp burst of pain exploded across the back of Sunset's head, and she found herself laying in the grass.
Don't you dare compare me to you! We are nothing alike!
Sunset slowly pressed her hands into the ground and pushed herself back onto her feet. She rolled her neck and growled. You really don't want to do this, Dash.
Turn around so I can beat your face in!
Rainbow said, filling her voice with as much malice as humanely possible. Rainbow Dash, you're an idiot. Sunset cracked her knuckles. But I've really been dying to get some aggression out. Sunset dropped down and spun, sweeping her leg out and catching Rainbow in the back of her heels, sending her to the ground. Sunset then pounced on her like a lion, but Rainbow struck her knees up, jabbing Sunset in the gut and throwing her onto her back. Laying on the ground, Sunset saw Rainbow jump to her feet and rush over, her fist reared back, ready to bear down on Sunset. As Rainbow came down, Sunset rolled out of the way, hearing a hand strike the dirt instead. She got to her feet and aimed a kick at Rainbow's head, but it was blocked by the back of her arm. Snarling, Rainbow threw another fist for Sunset's face, but was grabbed by the wrist as Sunset twisted her arm around and forced her to turn on her back.
Sunset then kicked off, sending Rainbow back to the ground.
Is that all you've got, Dashie?
Sunset brushed off some dirt from her shoulder, looking down at her opponent. Rainbow ripped some grass out of the dirt as she rose back to her feet.
I'm just getting started.
She moved with such speed, all Sunset saw was a blur before something connected with her nose. She staggered back, but didn't have any time to recover as Rainbow followed up with a swift punch to her gut. Sunset stumbled backward into a tree, holding a low branch for support, and clutching her stomach with her free hand. She could feel blood beginning to drip down her nose.
All right, that was pretty good.
Rainbow closed the distance, aiming a kick at Sunset's side. Sunset twisted around and raised her leg, taking the brunt of the attack with her shin. She then let go of the branch and jabbed with her fist, decking Rainbow in the eye. When she raised her hands to put pressure on the new bruise, Sunset grabbed her by the arm and turned her body again, repositioning Rainbow behind herself. She clenched her teeth, ignoring the pain coming from her center, and heaved Rainbow over her shoulder, slamming the girl onto the grass. Coughing and holding her stomach, Sunset knelt down near Rainbow, who was groaning in pain. Wiping the blood from her nose and on the back of her hand, Sunset couldn't help but be impressed that Rainbow had managed to score some good hits. Then again, she was the captain of at least 3 different sports teams, so it didn't come off as too much of a surprise. Regaining her breath, Sunset rose, leaving Rainbow on the ground.
Nice fight, Dash. Next time, I won't go easy on you.
As soon as Sunset turned her back, Rainbow had smashed into her, tackling her to the ground. The two rolled across the park, kicking and scratching as they screamed at one another.
You're just a persistent little gnat, aren't you?
Sunset growled, digging her knuckles into Rainbow's cheek. Rainbow flipped them over, pinning herself on top of Sunset.
And you're just a demon that needs to just disappear!
Sunset's eyes widened before they became dangerously narrow.
Stop calling me that!
She threw Rainbow off and pressed her down onto her stomach, grabbing the back of her hair. With a benevolent grin, she raised Rainbow's head and slammed it into the dirt. Once, twice, 3 times, before Rainbow freed an arm and smashed her elbow into Sunset's chest. With Sunset's grip weakened, Rainbow threw her off and wobbled to her feet, wiping the blood off her face before spinning around to give another high kick to Sunset. Sunset caught the foot in midair, briefly contemplating on breaking it. She had grown tired of this fight, and Rainbow in general. She had restrained herself from doing any long-term damage, but was now thinking Rainbow probably deserved it. The only thing holding her back was what the other girls would think. Instead, she yanked Rainbow forward and backhanded her across the face with as much force as she could muster before Rainbow fell. Hoping Rainbow would finally stay down, Sunset limped away, pressing her nose to try and staunch the bleeding.
Get back here! I'm not done with you yet!
For Celestia's sake,
Sunset said with a nasally voice. Looking back, she found Rainbow standing again, her left eye already swelling shut, giving her only one eye to glare at Sunset with.
Rainbow, please give up before I seriously hurt you.
However, Rainbow merely bared her teeth and raised her arms in a fighting stance. The 2 girls stared off at each other, Sunset dropping into a stance of her own. The sun had all but set now, with only a faint wave of pink marking the transition between day and night. Around them, the park had turned dark, a distant light post serving as their only source of illumination.
Well, well, well. What do we have here?
A cocky female voice called from the darkness. Sunset straightened up and turned around, her eyes falling upon a tall, rather muscular girl leaning against a nearby tree. She was tanned, like she had spent a little too much time at the beach, and had snow-white hair that was spiked and dyed purple at the tips, matching her eyeshadow. She wore a thick, brown leather jacket and a white tank top with brown cargo pants to complete her ensemble. Next to her was a lanky boy with darker skin and grayish hair that was cut just above his eyes. He wore a t-shirt with a picture of a dumbbell. Like the girl, his gaze was mostly fixed on Rainbow. Behind Rainbow, 2 more boys stepped into the light of the lamppost. One was bulky and orange with brown hair, and the other was shorter with gray skin and black hair that fell over his eyes, similar to his companion.
Rainbow Dash,
the girl said slowly, an even smile decorating her face.
We haven't seen you in forever. What you doing here? Picking fights?
The lanky boy next to her snickered. Looks more like she's losing them to me. Rainbow wiped some of the blood off her mouth.
Gilda,
She said coolly.
Dumbbell, Hoops. Score.
She addressed each of the boys in turn.
What the hell are you guys doing here?
Gilda pushed off the tree, her cocky smile still plastered on her face.
We were just in the neighborhood, and we just happened to stumble upon you two going at it. Then you started getting your butt kicked, and pretty hard, too.
She looked Sunset up and down before snorting.
Come on, Dash. She doesn't even look that tough. How can you be losing to her?
Sunset rolled her eyes and looked at Rainbow. How exactly do you know these losers? Guilty expression crossed Rainbow's face, and she averted her eyes from Sunset.
They were kinda in the gang I was in for a little bit.
You were in a gang? Sunset almost shouted.
It was a phase. Damn right it was a phase.
Gilda spat.
One day she's cool, and the next she's backing out because she thinks we're a bad influence or something stupid like that.
The voice softened to its usual arrogant tone.
But hey, once a griffin, always a griffin, right, Dash? I mean, we're still pals, right? We can help you take care of this dweeb if you want.
Rainbow glared at her.
No way, Gilda. This is my fight. Stay out of it.
Your fight?
Dumbbell laughed.
Please, we saw the way she decked you in the face. You should be begging for our help.
Hey, wait a minute, Score said, peering closer at Sunset.
I recognize her. That's the girl who beat up Needle and Pierce.
What?
Gilda leaned forward, taking another look at her with eerie, bird-like eyes.
Oh man, you're right. She totally fits the description. They got arrested by that stupid shining armor cop because of you.
Sunset cocked her head to the side before the realization hit her.
The two gangbangers from the night of the dance. So they got arrested. Good.
Gilda balled her fist.
We should seriously make you pay for sending two of our boys to prison. No way!
Rainbow yelled.
Back off, Gilda. What? You defend her instead of one of your own? You're not one of my own,
Rainbow said, her face turning red again.
You guys are a bunch of thugs and thieves. I told you I want nothing to do with you.
Gilda pounded her fist into her open hand.
You always did have a thick head, Dash. I guess we'll just have to beat some of that stubbornness out of you before you can join us again.
Sunset and Rainbow retreated until they were back to back with each other, surrounded on both sides. Sunset groaned. How did I get myself mixed into this?
You can always run if you want.
Please. Sunset Shimmer is no coward.
Good, because I still plan on kicking your butt when this is done.
Sunset smirked and put her hands up.
Don't worry, Dash. We can still kill each other when this is over.